The Unexplained Rundown is pleased to partner with tpublic.com and bring you some fun and fantastical apparel and accessories that are truly out of this world. If you're keen to support the show and see it grow, be sure to check out some of the cool designs in the merch store and grab yourself a bargain. Use the link in the description below.
Or concern you about the unknown and the unidentified flying object?
Oh, yes, we discussed it at every conference that we had with the military, and they never were able to make me a concrete report on.
Do you have anything on the subject, sir?
No, I haven't had anything on the subject, and there's always things like that going on. The flying saucers, and they've had other things, you know.
For years, the world has seen reality distorted, facts manipulated, and truth hidden. But there's even more to the story than anyone has ever suspected. Because no one has been able to see the whole picture. Until now.
Friends, welcome back to another episode of the Unexplained Rundown. I am your host, Grant Levac, and if you found this channel intentionally, then like me, you're intrigued by the unexplained mysteries of this mortal coil of ours, and you crave to know what's real and what's not. Welcome, friends. Got a jam-packed show today, so it's bound to be a long deep dive. So if you like deep dives, you've come to the right place. Some friends already here. Jimmy, always good to see you, my friend. We are indeed talking about all things Pine Gap today. Michael, good to see you. Multiple fringe groups believe there is a railway underneath Pine Gap. UAP, Fiona Barnett, and Aboriginal groups. Interesting. Haven't delved into that hypothesis or that thought today, but certainly many stories about Pine Gap. We've got Mac here. Great to see you, my friend. Thanks for joining. Akashi Chris is here. Mindfork, go and check out her channel. Mindfork does some really fun and entertaining stuff. Bex is here. Welcome, Bex. Great to see you. Short Order Cook 1. Thank you for joining, my friend. And we've got some others. My good man, Brendan. I haven't read Jeremy McGowan's paper yet. He just put out it on X, I believe, overnight. So I'm going to be having a keen look at that later today. Won't be covering it in this show because I haven't had a chance to read it, but I am very much looking forward to taking a look at it. So welcome, friends. If you want to go above and beyond just the standard like, share, subscribe, that goes a hell of a long way to help the channel grow. A lot of folks that watch the show are not subscribed. So if you're interested if you like the content that I put out and do the deep dives and the research, please do subscribe if you want to stay up to date. Thank you also to very generous Patreon members, Jimmy. We've got Jasmine, Clint, Shane, Dan, and YouTube member Telekinetic. If you want to support the show, see it grow above and beyond the like, share, subscribe, have a look at some of the links in the description below on Patreon and YouTube membership. So we're also on Spotify. So if you like to listen to your podcast, you can check us out there. All right. So today, folks, we're talking about all things the mystery that is Pine Gap. So let me pull up my trusty old slide deck. So Pine Gap, incredibly fascinating place. And to kind of give you a bit of a rundown for those that aren't familiar with Pine Gap. So basically a secretive joint US-Australian intelligence facility 18 kilometers south of Alice Springs in the Northern Territory, smack bang in the middle of Australia. It's been linked to UFO sightings and speculation since its establishment in 1970, often dubbed as Australia's Area 51. Its remote location and restricted access have fueled rumors of ET activity though much of the evidence is anecdotal and lacks official confirmation. So we're not going to kind of do a massive deep dive on the history of Pine Gap today, but I'll just we're all here for Pine Gap and UAPs, UFOs activity reported over the decades. So a couple of key points in the history of UFO sightings at Pine Gap. So in the 1970s, there were early reports and facility secrecy. After Pine Gap's completion in 1970, reports of unusual aerial phenomena began circulating. The facility's role in satellite surveillance and signals intelligence, combined with its restricted access, led to speculation about advanced technology testing, or ET activity. Sightings from this period often involved lights or objects moving erratically in the night sky, as noted in sources comparing Pine Gap to Area 51. Local residents and UFO enthusiasts reported these incidents, but no official records from the Australian government or the Royal Australian Air Force have confirmed them. Fast forward to the 1980s. Heightened UFO interest in the 1980s saw a surge in UFO enthusiasm across Australia, with Pine Gap as a focal point due to its proximity to an interesting place called Wycliffe Well, a self-proclaimed UFO hotspot. Anecdotal accounts from locals and travelers describe sightings of strange lights or craft near the facility at Pine Gap. Some attributed these to secret military tests, given Pine Gap's strategic importance during the Cold War. The RAF maintained files on UFO sightings during this period, but none specifically tied to Pine Gap have been publicly released. Now, that was in the 80s. Now, let's jump forward to the 1990s and 2000s. Conspiracy theories and pop culture. Pine Gap's reputation as a UFO hub grew, with conspiracy theories suggesting it housed, here we go, alien technology, or served as a meeting point for extraterrestrial contact. These claims often spread through online forums and media, lack verifiable evidence, but are amplified by the facility's secrecy. Notable reports from this area include alleged sightings by reliable witnesses, though details remain vague. The absence of declassified documents and the facility's ongoing operations kept speculation alive and well. Jump forward to the 2010s, to present day. Modern context and skepticism. Recent discussions, including podcasts and articles, continue to reference Pine Gap UFO sightings, often framing them as a part of its mystique. However, no conclusive evidence, such as photographs, videos, or official reports, has emerged. Some argue sightings could be misidentified military aircraft, drones, or atmospheric phenomena, given Pine Gap's role, obviously, in testing advanced surveillance technology. Australian UFO experts, like those cited in recent reports, emphasize that many sightings lack substantiation and urge critical examination of claims. All right, so that kind of just gives you a lightning quick rundown. So we're going to do a bit of a deep dive now, though, on Pine Gap. So fascinating place. So let's jump into our first. So I've got, how many images we've done there? Yeah, we're all good to go. So I'm going to pull up my first document for you, because those that watch the show know that I love my documents. So let's have a look at our first document. This is now my good pal and fellow researcher, Clark Watson, fellow Aussie, has done some wonderful research, both securing documents as well as curating a collection of documents that have publicly available through the National Archives of Australia on Pine Gap. And this is just one of a series of documents that are readily accessible within the National Archives of Australia. They were top secret, obviously, at the time. And this is just a great collection of documents that are available in the National Archives of Australia that gives you a snapshot of all of the suspicion and secrecy that surrounded Pine Gap following its establishment. Really, a treaty was signed in 1966 between the US and Australia. And, you know, all these, there's a lot of press coverage in the years following its establishment. So if you're interested to learn about the history of the establishment of Pine Gap and why there was so much secrecy surrounding its the installation early on, I haven't had a look at all of these articles and letters and correspondence. I mean, truly fascinating history, during the Cold War era. So if you're keen to explore this in detail, I know Jimmy probably will, being a National Archives of Australia buff. There is a ton of great historical information in these archives. But I'm not going to lament on articles and letters. I do want to show you, though, one that is very interesting. And this just speaks to the heart of the secrecy and the intrigue and mystery that surrounded Pine Gap following its establishment. So this is, again, Clark Watson done a great job on curating a lot of this content. He shared some of these resources with me. So this was a letter in 1966 by a gentleman by the name of A.T. Griffith, the Assistant Secretary. So who was A.T. Griffith? So if I pull up my good old notes here, just to give you an idea of who this dude is. There we go. I've got it here. So, so he was the Assistant Secretary within the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. He held this position for a period, advising 6 prime ministers on international relations. And essentially, you'll note in this letter, I'm not going to read through the whole letter, but if I do a zoom on in for you, really the first page, and this is obviously a secret document. Let me just zoom out so it's not too, there we go. So, Defence Space Research Facility, Alice Springs. The presentation of the existence of this facility, being Pine Gap, publicly poses some serious problems, none of which in my mind seem to be satisfactorily resolved. I've asked Mr. Blackers, don't know who that is, to call the meeting to come up with advice on this aspect. Additionally, it is difficult to do a good job on this without knowing the story, but we must accept the decisions on this aspect and do the best we can. The American company primarily involved is well known for its activities in satellite communication. This, in my view, gives the key to public presentation. I do not know what is in defense mind, but as the plot is moving at the moment, an official paper, at any rate, it is to be described as a defense space research facility. This means it is a non-operational facility. This is all right if it holds. The American have tremendous propensity to talk about these things in some ways, and there will be all sorts of questions put to the government about the facility. The government's answer is that it is a research facility. How long will such an answer appear fruitful? A flat question. It is a research facility or an operational facility is all that is needed to make things really awkward. If it is an operational facility, then it would be better to present a story about it which allowed for 2 things: the validity in principle of Australian Defence Department participation in space activity, and B, operational participation. In my mind, one form of participation which would be acceptable publicly is participation in defense communications. This is extremely plausible, given that the major American company is a communication expert in space activity. Communications admits of a defense role and operational role. So you can kind of get the gist there that, you know, Australia is really not wanting to reveal a whole lot of information about the true nature of Pine Gap, because it will certainly raise questions not only in the Australian public's eyes, but also from those in government. Again, have a look at, if you're interested, have a look at some of the great historical resources available publicly in the National Archives of Australia if you want to do a deep dive on the history of an establishment of Pine Gap. So let me summarize it for you. There was a great documentary series that was done on the ABC, I believe it was last year. So let me just pull back up my deck so you can see this. A great series called SPIES in the Outback. And it's a 5-part, I think a 5 or 6-part series done by a wonderful journalist for the ABC, Alex Barwick. And this is a short clip from the first episode called Selling a Space Base. This kind of gives you a good snapshot of the history of Pine Gap and the intrigue and mystery surrounding it. So let's have a quick look.
Gunshots puncture the silence from the rifle range nearby. I finally reach the ridge, and there it is.
They are absolutely enormous. It is weird that the way they're sort of just perched, as if they're suspended in the landscape.
These gleaming, white, giant domes that look more like oversized golf balls erupting from the desert floor are what's known locally as Pine Gap, or The base. This secret place in a secluded valley 18k south of Alice Springs has welcomed global power brokers, seen thousands call for its closure, is rumoured to have brought a Prime Minister to his knees. And that's only the beginning. War crimes, espionage, nuclear obliteration. There are some crazy rumours about Pine Gap here in Central Australia. I'm Alex Barwick, and my job as a journalist is to ask questions. But having worked here in Alice Springs for 16 years while raising a family, I learnt quickly you don't ask about Pine Gap. And in a small town where everyone knows everyone else's business, that's odd. In fact, it's unsettling. Nobody talks about Pine Gap, the base. But now I'm going to. Which makes me feel nervous. People can get locked up for spilling the beans on this place.
And as I start asking questions, I'm realising Pine Gap has a whole new significance now as each new international conflict explodes.
What on earth is happening in my backyard? Well, it all started in the shadow of nuclear destruction.
It began with the Cold War and a lie. This is season 3 of the ABC's Expanse podcast, Spies in the Outback. Episode 1, Selling a Space Base.
So there you go. So I would certainly encourage you to have a look at it if you're interested to learn, do a bit of a really thought-provoking and entertaining deep dive on Pine Gap. ABC, Alex Barwick did a wonderful job, much better obviously than I can cover off on in a live stream. So do check that out if you're interested to have a look. Now, to kind of show the humorous side, there is also some great Aussies that run a YouTube channel called Boy Boy, and they put out a episode on their YouTube channel. Might have been last year or the year before. I can't quite remember. I've also added it in the show notes below. So if you want to check it out, feel free. Why do I show you this? Because they tried to sneak their way into Pine Gap, and it makes for a very, very entertaining watch. So let me show you a brief clip from their episode on their YouTube channel, Boy Boy, where they tried to impersonate, present themselves as workers at Pine Gap and sneak their way in. So let me play this for you. There we go.
So last month we were on a flight and you want to look.
Buy an investment property without touching your
Always
savings.
bloody
The catch, you must be a homeowner with
smart. Like these leaks are redundant. See, the American government is so proud.
There we go.
So last month we were on a flight with fellow Aussie YouTuber Friendly Geordies. Just a completely normal domestic flight, just regular old takeoff and you're the landing, nothing out of the ordinary. I mean, until we were, pulled off the plane by federal police.
If you are on board, just make your way forward to the front of the cabin.
Yeah, that's awesome. How many cups do you have?
Yeah, fine. I just wanted to have a chat to you in relation to an incident where you guys were up at Pine Gap.
The remote Pine Gap spy station,
a collection of domes in the desert, a place very few Australians know much about at all.
The most powerful American intelligence facility outside of the United States.
No, close the gate, close it. No, stop.
So, really entertaining show. The boys did a good job. So if you're interested to see, how their efforts to try and sneak in to Pine Gap and then almost get arrested by the AFP, the Australian Federal Police, it makes for interesting viewing. So suffice it to say, very, very few people in Australia, the world, those that even live in Alice Springs, 18 k's north of Pine Gap, know very little about what goes on there. So we also know that Pine Gap is covered in good detail in Ross Coulthart's book, In Plain Sight. So let me pull up back to the deck. Now, for those of you that haven't read Ross's book, I think it's now in its second revised version, which I've got, my trusty version. So do have a read of it if you haven't already done so. But there are some references to Pine Gap in the book, and let me just read a couple of examples for you. There we go. So this is on chapter titled Hard Evidence on page 59 of the current revised version. So these sightings continue to this day. One senior military intelligence insider told me UAPs are still frequently observed over sensitive military facilities, including unexplained sightings recorded over the super secret Pine Gap, USA Australian base 18 kilometers southwest of Alice Springs. But once the objects are confirmed as not being craft operated by Russians or Chinese military or any potential foe, the prevailing view was that no one gave much more thought to what they were. I considered this to be an extraordinary admission because surely any incursion into a prohibited defense installation is by definition a threat. This odd lack of official curiosity into the reality of some UAPs invites the suspicion that someone or some agency is trying to suppress a bigger story. So that is one reference that Ross makes to Pine Gap. There's also, jump forward to a later chapter called Cracking the Cover-Up. This is on page 69 of Ross's revised version. He again talks about Pine Gap. As in the United States, there is a clear link between UAP sightings and sensitive military sites in Australia, especially those with links to the US's nuclear missile deterrent strategy. I was briefed by military insiders on other more recent sightings of anomalous hovering objects over Australian military sites, notably the joint US-Australian defense facility Pine Gap. Several witnesses, all serving or former military, declined to be identified, but privately confirmed sightings of anomalous glowing orbs and dark spheres stretching over several decades. Pine Gap is one of the United States' most important bases anywhere in the world, playing a key role in ballistic missile launch detection and US warfighting. So you've got people that are current or former Defense Force coming forward and sharing these accounts with Ross of anomalous activity happening over Pine Gap. And Ross goes on and talks about this a bit further in a chapter titled The Black Triangles on page 101. He says, few people know that an outback desert plain in Central Australia is the location for the most important American military base outside of the continental United States. The Joint Defense Facility at Pine Gap nestles below the 800-meter-high McDonald Ranges, just 18 kilometers southwest of Alice Springs. Its ochre-colored rocky ridges and undulating sandy country look like a scene from Mars. Originally a ground station for US satellites tracking the telemetry of Soviet missile launches, today Pine Gap receives electronic communications and other transmissions interpreted from space. It also collects the data from the highly sensitive infrared DSP early warning satellites hovering 35,000 kilometers above Earth, which capture the heat blooms of missile launches. Pine Gap's operations are constrained by their national security oaths to keep a tightly held secret. That the heat, light, and infrared sensors on these satellites sometimes detect objects that are clearly not missiles and have even been seen to change course under apparently intelligent control. The code name given to these strangely moving objects is fast walkers. The term includes mere space debris because it covers any orbital object seen passing through the field of view of an Earth-observing sensor, which is suspected of being in orbit. The object tracked in 1991, however, appeared to be under apparent intelligent control, as recently leaked documents reveal. So, again, Ross is obviously speaking to some folks that shared some interesting accounts with him on what people have seen over Pine Gap, and just speaks to the secrecy, mystery, and intrigue that is enduring with Pine Gap. Very little folks in the Australian government know what's happening at Pine Gap. We claim to have sovereignty and control of what's happening within our own backyard, but really we don't. A lot of folks in government don't even know what's going on. And you have, former Prime Minister Gough Whitlam tried to, at one point during his tenure as Prime Minister back in the 70s, get a better understanding of what was going on at Pine Gap, and even threatened to shut it down if the US wasn't going to be more transparent. And there's allegations and rumors that the CIA fought hard to get him removed from office because he wanted to expose a lot of the goings on at Pine Gap. So again, it's just there's so many fascinating tales and history about Pine Gap, not just on the UAP subject, but just the scandal in the political world as well. So building on obviously what talks about in his book, Pine Gap, let's now segue into Ross recently talked about Pine Gap in his reality check. So let me just pull up again my deck. So on a recent episode of Reality Check, Ross does a regular Q&A spot with his producer, and a question was asked of Ross about Pine Gap. So let me play this clip for you because it will lead nicely into what we're going to be talking about today. Now I need to make sure I've got the right clip here. Let me have a look here. Just bear with me one, folks. Make sure I've got the right clip. Here we go. Reality check. There it is. Okay. Sorry, folks. All right. Let me pull this up so we can have a look at this clip. Here we go.
Fellow Aussie, I'm very interested in any information you have about Pine Gap and its activities around UAP. Are we likely to get any whistleblowers on this facility? Also, is there any movement to press our government for UAP disclosure? Really appreciate your continued investigations into the subject. Many thanks, MJM.
Okay, for those people who don't know what Pine Gap is the most important US military base outside the continental United States, and it is located slap bang in the middle of Australia near Uluru, otherwise known as Ayers Rock, near Alice Springs, right in the middle of central Australia. And the reason it's there, it was built originally in the 1960s as a station for receiving the downlink signals from the DSP satellites, the Defence Support Program satellites, that were recording ballistic missile flashes on the surface of the planet. They were intended as like early warning satellites to signal whether a potential foreign adversary was launching a missile. And they've been an important part of the US strategic nuclear deterrence for the last 60 years. What has happened at Pine Gap is it's become an absolutely essential arm of the Five Eyes Alliance. I've seen serendipitously I was taken through a place called Garden Island in central Sydney, and I was at one stage escorted by a very senior minister in our government and taken somewhere where I probably shouldn't, and shown the feeds coming into a naval facility in central Sydney, which are also the feeds, I understand, that go through Pine Gap. And they were literally satellite feeds from drones and from satellites in real time coming in through Australia on their way to America, and they were mind-blowing. It was quite extraordinary to see the level to which Australia, as an ally of the United States, is plugged in to the intelligence feed from America. And that, for some reason, has attracted the interest of the phenomenon. Yes, there are many recorded incidents that I write about in my book, In Plain Sight, an investigation into UFOs and impossible science. And you will find in there my recognition of the fact that there have been multiple incidents reported by both American personnel and Australian personnel. This is a joint facility where in some cases orbs have been seen. I spoke to one person who described seeing an orb at one stage tracking the fence line around the facility, and then as they watched, it literally went through the wall of the building, and then there were CCTV feeds of the object, whatever it was, passing through other walls and going into allegedly the more sensitive parts of that facility. And I'm told this happens quite a lot. I've spoken to Aboriginal communities that live very close by on the other side of the so-called McGonagle Range, and they tell me they see weird stuff in the sky all the time, and that Pine Gap does seem to be a bit of a hotbed of UAP activity.
There you go. So first and foremost, that's an account that I had not heard from Ross before. An orb, account of an orb passing through solid objects, walls at Pine Gap, very reminiscent of the claims that Lou Elizondo made that he had observed green orbs in his home for a number of years throughout his tenure at ATIP, if you believe that to be true, and that orbs would disappear through walls. So again, just a fascinating account that I had not heard from Ross before about, and even captured on CCTV. You know, I doubt anything like that would be available for release through FOIA if it exists, but fascinating account nonetheless. And what was interesting in the first part of that clip was Ross talking about that you have Australian Defence personnel that are stationed at Pine Gap, and you've got all of these raw feeds from these satellites coming through into Pine Gap, where then it is kind of relayed to the Space Force bases in the United States. So it begs the question, well, are any Australian Defence personnel exposed to any of these, as Ross indicated, if they're exposed to these raw feeds and these satellites have the capability of detecting anomalous objects within low Earth orbit and geosynchronal Earth orbit, whatever the word is. These satellites, if they're detecting anomalous objects in Earth's orbit, are Australian Defence personnel exposed to that raw data before it's then kind of relayed to the United States? So, because the formal official position of the Australian Department of Defence, move along, folks, there's nothing to it. UAP is not anything we should be concerned about. Not a national security threat, no safety of flight risk. We've got everything under control, folks. Move along. So interesting comments from Ross. I know that a few comments have come through already, so do want to acknowledge that folks have taken the time to post some thoughts. So do want to say hello to Dorothy. Welcome. Great to see you, my friend. We have Mark Luper in here. Good to see you. Thanks for joining. We have DLH 1803. I was in Darwin storm chasing one year and photographed two objects in a very active storm cell. One object was jet black and morphing in shape. Interesting. It'd be interesting to learn if you ever had any of those photos analyzed, or if you've shared them anywhere, because I'm sure folks would be interested to have a look at them. A response to that, I photographed objects near storms while chasing, also not plasma but solid objects. My personal theory is whatever they are, harness the power of storms somehow. Interesting. I've never had my own sighting, so it's on my bucket list, but yet to have the good fortune of seeing something anomalous in our skies or in the ocean or on the ground. Jasmine, great to see you, my friend, Patreon member. So thank you for your ongoing support and tuning in. Beck's comment, James, I just tagged you a post on YouTube. It's so cringe, but you have to listen to it. Okay, we'll leave that out to the side. I'm sure it's probably something to do with the BS that's going on still with the MH370 these days. We're not even going to go there today. Dean, great to see you, my friend. Thanks for tuning in. We're really only just getting started, so you haven't missed out on too much. If you look at longitudes, Lake Autonomous, okay, that might be related to an earlier comment. Let's see. Some other comments that have come through. Mark McHiggins, great to see you, my friend. Thank you for joining. That's a lovely pic of Roscoe from before with his trusty hat on. Xavier, thank you for joining, my friend. Good to see you here. We've certainly got some folks that I haven't seen in the chat before. I think Pine Gap has a close relationship to Antarctica. Haven't heard that one before, but Antarctica is certainly an interesting place. If you follow the lore and mystery of Antarctica over the years past, there's certainly, I'm sure, a lot of stories of. I mean, if you listen to Eric Hecker and his accounts of, I mean, I don't know what to buy of his account, but of some, pretty incredible technology that, according to Stephen Greer, caused the Christchurch earthquake a number of years ago. So Technics, he's full of SHIT. I know the electrician at Pine Gap, and there is nothing there, there. He's been all over the facility and done almost the electrical wiring in the place. So we've got an alleged contact for someone that works there saying it's all nothing to see, folks, move along. Mark McKiggins, one may find there are many underground levels. It has been rumored that there is an underground structure at Pine Gap. And I know Ross was asked that question not so long ago as well. He hasn't seen any evidence to support that claim, but I mean, it sounds very similar to what we've heard time and time again about the long rumored S4 south west of Area 51 that has all these sublevels. And we're going to be talking about S4 today. Mickey, hi all. Happy to hear some Aussie pushing for disclosure. We'll certainly trying to get the Australian government to take it a little bit more seriously anyway, because they're really not doing a whole lot at the moment. They're sitting on their ass. The UFO Aussie, Reese, great to see you, my friend. Looking forward to this one, mate. Thank you for joining, my friend, and looking forward to seeing your interesting content in due course. So thanks for tuning in. Dorothy, an extensive underground structure seems likely given that it's in the middle of the country. It's certainly an interesting interesting thought. I haven't seen any evidence to support that there is an underground structure, but I know that we will be diving into bases and underground bases in this session. Griff, love this worldwide push. Thanks and greetings, y'all. So thank you for your comments, folks. Please keep them coming. If you've got questions or just comments, I'm happy to air them as we go through. So let's move away from Ross for the moment. And as much as I cringe to talk about what we're going to talk about now, I'm going to dive into the world of Dr. Stephen Greer and talk about, we've mentioned this briefly on a previous episode of the Unexplained Rundown, but the Disclosure Project briefing document for 2025 that's sensitive and confidential, apparently, so much that he has made it available for purchase on his website at drstephengreer.com. So thank you to Jimmy for giving me a heads up on this briefing document. The document that we're going to look at specifically is this one, which I cringe to read through it, but I will because we're talking about Pine Gap. So in this Disclosure Project Intelligence Archive briefing document, there is a section devoted to Pine Gap and faked alien abductions. Now take this for what you will. So Pine Gap in Australia is understood to be a prime location for these covert UFO UAP operations. It's underground. So Stephen Greer is claiming in this document that it's an underground facility, has sublevels, is similar to the one located in the Chihuahua Desert. A physicist with whom Dr. Greer had met in Seattle years ago shared his experience. He was accompanied by security personnel for protection. He had been on helicopters that entered the Pine Gap facility, which, like the one in the Chihuahua Desert, is concealed by a hologram designed to resemble a mountainside. I'm going to try and get through this without cracking up. Upon landing on an elevated platform, the descent leads deep underground. During his time there, the physicist observed the creation of these entities, describing them as emerging from a conveyor belt, much like sausages. These fake aliens are produced with advanced UFO-UAP craft, electronic warfare systems capable of affecting consciousness, and tools to render people unconscious or stunned. They also employ canisters of drugs to incapacitate those in the area. To most observers, these aliens are highly, are highly convincing, but they are not real ET beings. They are man-made, consisting of android, robotic, and some biological systems far more sophisticated than the rudimentary versions used decades ago. In the late 1950s and early 60s, earlier models involved humans made up to look like aliens, as described by the AFOSI officer. Here it comes, Richard Doty. Some were individuals with certain defects, such as short stature, who were made up to resemble aliens and then placed on man-made ARVs, alien reproduction vehicles, to attack people. This was the case with Betty and Barney Hill, whose abduction is now the subject of a production by President Obama, who remains unaware of the true nature of the event. And then it kind of goes on. It doesn't really, that's pretty much where it leaves Pine Gap. But man, if you're utilizing Richard Doty as a source, automatically that throws up a huge red flag for me, despite the fact that the red flag initially is Dr. Stephen Greer. Yep, I do not give that any credence whatsoever. But because we're covering Pine Gap and all things UAP, take it for what you will and do with it what you wish. So let's move into something that's a little bit more grounded in reality, and that is the great work by wonderful Aussie researcher who I've talked about time and time again on this podcast, Bill Chalker. And he authored a great book, The Oz Files, which is very, very hard to come by these days, a number of years ago. And Bill, like Keith Basterfield, is one of the true veterans and champions of UAP UFO research in Australia. They've been at it for decades. And I certainly value the work that Bill and Keith have done over the years. So why are we talking about Bill Chalker? Well, let me jump into his blog. He has a wonderful blog that he does. He publishes a lot of his research and his interviews. So let me pull this up. Where is it? Here we go. And he's done actually a series of 3 articles on Pine Gap, and they're a while back. So he's done research for many, many years, and this is an article back on 2011, Pine Gap, a reality check. Now I'm not going to read through the entire blog articles because we'd be here for probably quite a while, but I have added Bill's blog in the show notes below. So if you want to have a look, just jump into his blog, search for Pine Gap, and you'll get some really interesting information on it. I will touch on, though, a couple of references that Bill makes to UFO cases in and around Pine Gap, where we will start with, there we go. So UFOs and aliens are lightly touched upon. This is in a book that is done by David Rosenberg, Inside Pine Gap, the spy who came in from the desert. And so Bill mentions that in this article, UFOs and aliens are lightly touched upon, but only in the context of the original base descriptions, fanning rumors of a UFO connection. David Rosenberg highlights a 1967 story. He states, despite the countless stories involving UFOs and Pine Gap offered up by the internet, the aliens must have kept a very low profile during my 18-year tenure in operations. This is obviously quoting from the book, as I never saw any evidence of aliens at or around Pine Gap. And you can see from, space base may attract flying saucers, says expert. Bill interviewed David on August 13, 2011, and addressed the UFO rumors in detail, even highlighting an account that allegedly occurred during his tenure. In September 1998, at a Sydney UFO conference, John Alshettle of PRA gave a presentation of an alleged Pine Gap UFO intrusion that had ostensibly occurred during October 1997. Alshettle presented material that suggested the base had overflights of UFOs, and that just outside the perimeter of the boundary of the base, Aboriginal witnesses had a striking UFO counter which had left behind physical traces. Alshettle's presentation seemed to indicate he had been given unprecedented access to Pine Gap, had been taken onto the base and been given access to documentation and a CD-ROM that contained imaging from Pine Gap perimeter security cameras that are apparently related to the UFO's physical trace event that had apparently occurred just north of the base. Now, because there's reference there of security cameras, that kind of makes me think about what Ross just mentioned in his comments there, that he had heard of account from someone that orbs had been transitioning through walls. So I only just thought of that. Bill was in the audience for Oshettle's presentation. He says, my own extensive research and experience with the UFO and physical trace cases made me think that the physical trace event he was presenting was similar, if not identical, to a striking lightning ball lightning event, and the ground traces appeared to be very much like expected lightning ground strike evidence, particularly the phenomenon of, I've heard that word, fulgurites. Additionally, Oshettle's analysis of the alleged Pine Gap perimeter camera imaging seemed to me to be more about making far too much of what may have been prosaic, low-weight stimuli punctuated by his unsubstantiated and somewhat bizarre suggestions that it was evidence of black holes and plasma states and dimensional shifts. So clearly Bill is really not buying what this guy is selling. I took the opportunity to privately question John Oshettle at the conference. As I was a physical chemist, I naturally inquired about the density, specific gravity, and other characteristics of the material recovered from the site. I was surprised that PRA had not been able to get any data on the material between gathering the samples back in October 97 and Oshettle's conference presentation in September 1998. I indicated I'd give him a reasonable, reliable result in 5 minutes. In the wake of the conference, it proved difficult to get any further information from Oshettle, but eventually he advised that the globule densities were averaging at 2.836, all above and beyond me. I don't know what all this means, which was quite heavy, but typical of glass-specific gravity. The material was apparently confirmed as fused silicate. This is what I was anticipating. I had felt from Oshelle's conference presentation and his comments to me that the ground impact event may have been a spectacular lightning ground strike event. So something prosaic may be presented as something that was presented as something exotic, but may have been completely prosaic. I'll just read a little bit more. I suspected that the Pine Gap people and DSTO, Defense Science Technology Organization, allegedly also involved investigating the event, had been intrigued by the incident and that it had been perhaps spuriously linked to the UFO tracks over the base, some of which had been caught on the Pine Gap perimeter cameras. But context should always be considered. Pine Gap had long been a base that was both a target and originator of controversy and intrigue. It had developed an apocryphal legendary status and was uncritically cast as Australia's Area 51, a secret UFO base, and a whole lot of other conspiracy-driven identities. The Alice Springs location and the Pine Gap area to the west had been the site of various UFO sightings, but often these were of low-weight nocturnal light variety, and many seemed generated by the garbage bag / hot air balloon variations. Apparently, local police had even detained the occupants of the vehicle in the act of launching such devices, only released them when they determined they were American-based employees. The film imagery captured in October 1907 seemed rather poor and ambiguous in quality, and it seemed on the limited airing it got at the UFO conference to be rather dubious. It would be helpful to be able to analyze the PRA data, but unfortunately, like on other occasions with PRA investigations, such as their investigations of the Kelly Cahill, another Australian case, they were not being forthcoming, and the material seemed to end up in some sort of odd bowerbird PRA bunker of silence and scant open operation. On the limited and confusing evidence available, it seemed possible that some Pine Gap personnel, DSTO and PRA, got swept up in a self-perpetuating loop of misinterpretation and delusion. Some openness and clarity from PRA would help resolve whether the events at Pine Gap during 1997 were about real and compelling UFO events, or more about nature unbound hoaxing and the will to believe. I think Bill is on the money there. I think, sadly, too often, there is people that take advantage of those that can be easily manipulated and far too open to suspending their disbelief. I won't read through the rest of that article. You can have a read of it if you wish. But Bill does go on to talk a little bit further in another article about, again, Pine Gap. This is a little more recent in years, September 2019, Project Rainfall, The Secret History of Pine Gap and UFOs. Now, again, references a book, Project Rainfall by Tom Gilling. There we go. So Tom Gilling, the author of this book, touches the all appropriate bases and even dives into a final chapter entitled A Saucer Full of Secrets, tipping the narrative are into a twilight zone between information and speculation that made it irresistible to UFO fanaticists. This is on page 2072. To quote Gilling, the cloak of secrecy the CIA had thrown over its flying saucer investigations also covered its spying operations at Pine Gap, and with similar results. In both cases, the public suspected the agency was up to more than it would admit. The mystery surrounding both UFOs and Pine Gap convinced many Australians that the two were linked. Tom Gilling then offers a parallel narrative where a real linkage seems thin, indeed, on the evidence he plays around with. But we have been down this path before, and Bill references his 2011 post. Again, a lot of stories and people conflating and combining these accounts with the mystery that is Pine Gap. Now, does that automatically strike out all of the other accounts that of anomalous objects that people have seen at Pine Gap? Not necessarily. And Bill goes on to talk about some of the cases that he is aware of at Pine Gap. Let me see if this was another more recent article that Bill did in June of 2023, The Ultimate Secret and the Australian Experience. So let's come down to the section that Bill references Pine Gap. It's quite a long article. You know what? I'll just do the good old search. Here we go. So in this article, Bill does a listing, really interesting list, actually. I remember reading this a while back, listing of Australian crash retrieval stories. And at number 21, you have several Pine Gap anecdote of UFOs, such as a hunting party observing a craft flying out of a concealed door, and an abductee who alleges he went inside an underground site there witnessing craft, examinations and alien liaison activity, and a UFO researcher who claims he astral traveled to Pine Gap secret facility. I won't include here a case-by-case catalog, but instead we'll refer to a few stories which highlight the difficulties of investigating these sorts of stories. So let's jump down to the next reference, and I think that's actually the last. Oh no, here we go. I went a little bit too far. Where is it? This is the one. Okay, so let's now come on down. You know what? We'll just do it this way. There we go. So he's talking about such tales, while curious, are proof of nothing. They, however, give substance, albeit of a dubious kind, to the widely held belief that secret UFO activity and research has been carried out for years at remote sites and restricted areas in various locations, including South Australia, Salisbury, Woomera, and the Nullarbor. And the UFO Aussie, Reese, done a great job on his family history and Woomera and the connection with the UAP topic. Bill goes on to say Northern Territory, Pine Gap, and obviously New South Wales near the St. George Basin on the south coast. Pine Gap paranoia. So Pine Gap, codenamed Merino, located near Alice Springs and described as a joint defense space research facility, has been long a subject of concern and attracted some mystique, principally because of its clandestine role in intelligence gathering. Much is known about its sensitive role as a ground station for the US Defense Satellite Program, DSP, as Ross referred to in his reality check answer, and in part in the NSA and CIA presence in Australia. With this sort of shadowy activity, it should not be surprising that Pine Gap has become a focus of a number of apocryphal, I can't pronounce it, UFO-related stories. The now defunct Nation Review reported on Pine Gap's role in sci-fi research in its Spying Around column in 1974, William H. Martin stated, the Pine Gap Research Facility near Alice Springs has managed to keep secret until now one of the most unbelievable research projects in the world. The United States has been carrying out continuous research into electromagnetic propulsion, EMP for short, at Pine Gap since it was established in 1966. I said 1970 before, it's 1966. I understand that last-minute flaws in design operation of the EMP vehicles have probably put the completion date back by 4 years to 1979. Research into electromagnetic propulsion began in the United States soon after World War II. After some successful results, it became necessary to move the experimentation from populated areas to more remote spots. Security aspects of the EMP project have included hypnotic and post-hypnotic keys implanted in personnel prior to their acceptance into the project. Again, take away all of this from what you will. Retired NASA scientist and UFO researcher Dr. Richard Haynes alluded to an unrelated newspaper story describing how a Perth newspaper received 2 visitors claiming to be Pine Gap employees. They allegedly spoke of electromagnetic devices which manifested themselves as UFOs and even alien beings at Pine Gap. Professor John Frodsham of Western Australia was told of the experience of 3 kangaroo shooters, who alleged that at about 4:30 a.m. one morning from a ridge overlooking Pine Gap, they witnessed a camouflage door open up within the facility. A circular, metallic-looking craft rose vertically and silently and then took off at high speed. This is all very reminiscent of the stories that we've heard time and time again out of Area 51, a la Bob Lazar. Again, all very interesting stuff, but, not really anything that can be corroborated, deep dive researched on. I mean, I think Bill makes a really good point there. These are some very interesting stories, but that's sadly all they are. They're stories without really any, evidence to kind of dot the I's and cross the T's. I know a few other comments have come through, folks, so let me just call attention to what you've commented on thus far. Let's have a look. Beck says, thoughts about the Mount Zeil remote viewing data. We're going to get into that, so stay tuned. Stay tuned. Dean adds in a link there. Great call out there, Dean. There are some documents on Pine Gap in the Black Vault, so if you want to have a look there as well, in addition to the National Archives of Australia, do feel free. Yes, Bill Chalker is indeed a legend. He's done some great research over the years. Short Order Cook 1 response to Beck. A few have remote viewed Mount Zeil, Future Forecasting Group, Farsight, and I think Daz Smith and some others, maybe Paul Smith. One of them had RV data from Mount Zeil, might have been Dick Algar. So we'll talk about Mount Zeil in today's session. Technics. If Pine Gap doesn't pick up unknown data sources or communication from aliens, America and Russia won't, as Pine Gap is far more superior to receiving transmissions. That is certainly an interesting point. Jimmy goes on to say someone should set up Skywatcher like project near Mount Zeil. Yep. If there is something to it, then someone should get out there and try and collect some data. Ross has said he's been out there, didn't see anything other than shrub and dry Australian outback. Bex goes on to say, Moira McGee in the Alien Gene had a passage about Pine Gap. I'll send you a screenshot on Twitter. Ah, perfect. Yeah, I haven't seen that, so that would be appreciated. Thanks, Bex. Short Order Cook 1. To Jimmy, I'd be interested to know why Jake Barber and crew picked wherever they are to do their Skywatcher project. If they can dog whistle them in, it should be possible anywhere. That's a good point. So why did they choose? I mean, maybe what they call the range is where they've had activity and success in the past. So if you're on a good wicket, why would you change? But I certainly think, and I posed this to someone not long ago. I said, would Skywatcher be prepared to partner with, say, the Galileo project? Because if Skywatcher's got the dog whistle and the Galileo project under Avi Loeb has this bespoke proprietary sensor system, sensor stack, it makes sense that put them together. And if Skywatcher can do what they claim to do with this dog whistle, well, it makes sense that you want to have the best possible sensor stack that's going to be able to capture data on UAP. So it would be very interesting to see if Avi Loeb is interested in forming some sort of collaboration or partnership with Skywatcher, not just at the range, but other locations that Avi Loeb's looking at as well. And we've talked about, I think I've talked about in the past, the potential of Avi Loeb partnering with Brandon Fugel at Skinwalker Ranch and seeing what data they can collect on the Galileo Project sensor stack. Whoa, I didn't know that. Dean says 1.5 gigabytes of documents, specifically Australian related, on the blackvault.com. So John Greenwald does an awesome job of capturing documents, not just US centric, but certainly from around the globe. And he does certainly have a ton there that are Australian related. Make sure any other comments that have come through. Some great engagement back and forth between folks in the chat, which is good to see. DLH1803, in reply to Grant asking if I've shared the picture, it is on the MUFON site. Case report 70432. Thanks for the tip. I'll be sure to go back over this chat transcript and have a look at that. And I know that Short Order Cook appreciates that as well. Interesting comment from Texas. If you've never been to the Australian Outback, you're talking about things you know nothing about and probably would not even survive. I'd say that's a good point. If you're going for a hike out the Australian Outback, make sure you've got a compass, you've got tons of water, you've got plenty of sunblock, and you've got at least a mobile phone or a sat phone, because you're going to be up shit creek without a paddle, as they say, very, very quickly. I haven't been out in Alice Springs, the Pine Gap, so I'm certainly not one to talk, but I have certainly done plenty of hikes in my time in the Blue Mountains in New South Wales, and you can get lost pretty quickly. Technics, I like Grant. He shows the woo, but doesn't necessarily mean he's all in on the stories. I appreciate his take with a spice of common sense. Yeah, so me presenting this to you, and there will be a lot of woo as we go through today, is not an endorsement of me accepting it to be true. I'm just anything that is UAP and Australia related, I like to explore, I like to examine, and then I can come to my own conclusions, reach my own informed conclusion. I'm trying to present to you a ton of different open source information. So if it's important to you, you can undertake your own research or you can come to your own conclusion. Me covering it certainly does not represent my endorsement of what we're talking about. So thanks for your comments, folks. That was an interesting number of articles by Bill Chalker, so you can have a look at that if you're interested to. The link is in the show notes below. So let's now transition into the woo and have a look at, there is a, now apologies for the boring ads on this page, but there was an article from 2018, 10 conspiracies and crazy claims from the Pine Gap facility. Now, some of these are not UAP related. Number 10, lethal drone strikes connected to Pine Gap. I actually say there's probably a lot of validity on that. Edward Snowden's claim about Pine Gap. Again, I'd probably say there's quite a bit of validity about that, being the hub of the NSA, but that's not what's of interest to us in the UAP world. The camouflage door encounter, which Bill just mentioned in his article. Again, I'll read this briefly. It's only a short one. Perhaps one of the most well-known encounters at Pine Gap is that of 3 men returning home from an all-night hunting trip. It was around 4:30 a.m. December 1989 when the 300s noticed a hidden door camouflaged in the natural surrounding terrain open before them. From behind the door emerged a huge metallic grey disc. The object moved without sound, hovering for a moment over the base. As the 3 shocked young men looked on, the disc suddenly shot upward at a lightning pace. In a moment, it was gone. As they gathered their thoughts, they would witness the camouflage door moving back into place, shutting tight as if it was never there. The 3 men would tell their account to a local university professor, who in turn would forward a report to the UFO researcher John Lear. Connections to Bob Lazar, vouching for the witnesses are reliable but reluctant to discuss what they saw. Again, kind of, you get an air of Bob Lazar in there as well. So, and look at the date as well, of 1989. And who came out in 1989? It was Bob Lazar under the alias of Dennis, under the cover of darkness, in a pickup truck, doing an interview on camera with George Knapp. Flying bathtubs. This is one that I'm not aware of. Almost a decade previously, in 1980, came a similar sighting to that of the three hunters. So this is the same hunters. Two Northern Territory, similar sighting to that. Okay, so it's not the same guys, but it's similar. Two Northern Territory police officers, interesting, comes with an air of credibility, were part of a search operation for a missing child. They were covering the area alongside the Pine Gap facility when suddenly a door that was previously camouflaged opened in front of them. Amazed, they watched as several objects with a bathtub shape left the doorway. Actually, you know what? Let me see if I can zoom on in so you guys can read this as well. There we go. That's better. Where were we? They watched as several objects with a bathtub shape left the doorway and made their way calmly across the base. Even more unbelievable, a dark hole appeared from nowhere in the hills that surround the facility. The strange objects entered this opening before it, and they disappeared. By the time the two officers had focused their attention back on the doorway, it was nowhere to be seen. Although both officers would speak of their sightings to researchers, it remains a mystery as to just what they saw. The following two incidents, however, have some remarkable similarities to each other despite being a decade apart. Interesting. So I wonder if the 1980 incident was then appropriated by the hunters in 1989. I mean, if they were aware of this, did they then make that a story of their own and add to it? I'm just kind of playing devil's advocate on that front. 6, strange blue lights. While carrying out work for the Australian government in 1973, a cartographer would have one of the earliest recorded strange experiences connected to Pine Gap. It was shortly after midnight when an intense vertical shift of blue light lit up in front of him, obviously coming from inside the grounds of the base. Going against his better instincts, he slowly moved his vehicle closer to the base. Upon arriving as close as he dared, he could hardly believe the sight before him. Around about 300 meters from the ground, a large gleaming disc hovered. As he watched another beam of blue light come from the UFO and toward the ground, where several radomes, those weatherproof housings that protect radar antenna, were situated. A few moments of silence followed the lights, ceasing before another light appeared again, this time from the radomes to the craft above. This situation repeated for around 30 minutes before the disc began to spin quicker and quicker. In a flash, it shot into the sky and was gone. So, I don't know, make of these what you will, but certainly people are coming forward with accounts of what they claim to have seen, whether or not these are just works of fiction or if they have genuinely seen something they cannot explain. Interesting. 5, mysterious tips lead to strange sightings. Perhaps because of the nature of their work in the Australian government, the 5 witnesses of a 1984 encounter at Pine Gap preferred to tell the tale of the incident anonymously. The leader of the group had been receiving increasing reports of UFO sightings in the skies above Pine Gap in the weeks leading up to the encounter. One message, however, was more mysterious than the rest. It advised that something big was going to happen at Pine Gap in the upcoming days. The dates given remain a mystery, again in the interest of protecting the men's identities. Acting on this news, the 5 men split themselves into 2 groups, and using 2 vehicles, they approached the base from different positions. Once there, they essentially kept a stakeout of the grounds. For the first 3 days, there was no activity of any kind. On the fourth night, however, that changed. Several large military vehicles began ferrying large groups of people in the coveralls to the large radomes on the base. As this was taking place, a pillar of light suddenly shot upward from the ground to the sky. A strange cloud was forming high above the pillar, around the pillar. When it vanished, 5 strange craft were making their way to the base. 4 diamond-shaped UFOs and 1 of a cigar shape. Geez, we're getting everything here. Once they were over the base, the pillar of light appeared again, this time from the craft above to the grounds below. This went on for several minutes, all while the strange cloud above continued to form. In a moment, the 5 craft had vanished. Far out. You're getting there's some some definitely interesting accounts here. Number 4, Strange activity viewed from private plane. In 1975, while flying a private plane near Pine Gap airspace, the pilot and the several passengers on board were all interested to get a sneaky look at the strange activities in the relatively new and secretive facility. Hence, all had their attention towards the base, and they were not to be disappointed. Out of nowhere, a large white object appeared to take off from the base below them at absolute breakneck speed. Almost as soon as the witness focused their eyes on the bizarre object, it had vanished into the sky above them. The plane continued on its journey, and upon landing, the pilot made a report of the sighting. Wonder where that link takes us to. Let's have a look. Okay, just another article on their website. Both the pilot and all of the passengers were asked to wait for investigators to take further details of their encounter. Upon arriving, these investigators, wonder who these investigators are, allegedly told the witnesses that they were not to talk about what they saw and essentially to forget about the incident. Getting Westall vibes there a little bit. The many gardeners of Alice Springs, I won't talk about that one. Operating in other dimensions. All right, let's dive into this one. Similar to how those at CERN have been accused of looking to open doorways to alternate dimensions, so has a facility in the desert lands of Australia. One particular researcher and author, Richard Sorter, wrote extensively these claims in his book, Underground Bases and Tunnels, in which he boldly stated that the base operates in alternate dimensions. While these claims are crazy in their own right, the reasons given for them are perhaps even more so. They include experiments with time travel and super soldier programs. What's that great movie? I'm getting Jean-Claude Van Damme vibes there. Super soldier programs that take place in the future before the soldier, oh, here we go, 20 and back, before the soldier is age reversed and sent back to the past. So getting some Corey Good vibes here. As you might imagine, those who subscribe to Sorter's claims are few and far between, and while there is most probably is some clandestine activity taking place at Pine Gap, is very likely to be in our reality. And I would agree with that sentiment. The last entry on our list is no less outlandish. The CIA portal experiments. And this will be a good segue for us into some of the other things we're talking about. While it is widely accepted that various branches of US intelligence operate out of Pine Gap, the presence of the CIA is often the one met with most suspicion. Perhaps the truly strangest conspiracy claims involving the CIA are those suggesting time travel experiments and super soldier programs that take place on Mars, no less. Many of these claims exist, and while they have to be treated with a very large pinch of salt, they are interesting. The aforementioned Richard Sauter claimed to have spoken with a whistleblower named Rich Hansen. According to Sauter, Hansen not only was part of these ultra-secret programs, but he left for Mars military service from a time portal in Australia. While Sauter didn't confirm the location to be Pine Gap, assuming for a moment there is some truth to these wild claims, the one likely location would be such a place. Unless the facility suddenly becomes declassified and its decade-old secrets are laid bare, then the theories, claims, and sightings will likely continue for some time. So a good article in that it kind of captures a lot of some of the reports. Again, I had never heard of any of those before starting to research, obviously for today's episode. So take those stories for what you will. Stories, is there more something to it? Who knows? You can reach your own conclusions. Let's now get even further into the woo and talk a little bit about Robert Dean. So he was, I'll pull up my trusty web browser again here. So I don't know. I've added this full interview in the show notes below. So if you want to have a look at it, feel free. I can't recall what year this is from, but let me play this clip. This is Robert Dean talking about portals at S4 and Pine Gap.
At the very bottom of this thing at S4, there was a gate. A retired bird colonel shared with me. He said, I went down to level, the lower level, the 30th floor. He says, they told me to put on a summer uniform, and it was wintertime. He went down, they had his luggage and suitcase and his briefcase and all. And he stepped through the doorway and he came out and he was at, what's the middle of Australia? Pine Gap?
Pine Gap.
Mm-hmm. He went through a door at S4 and on the other side was Pine Gap.
Australia.
Yeah.
So they already had teleportation at that point.
We were to learn later was just a mile and a half from one of the major UFO ET installations on the planet. The ETs had had a facility there for apparently over 100 years. The retired colonel told me, he said, you know, I was in a state of shock. He said, I didn't feel a thing. He says, I went through the door. I'm in S4 in Nevada. He says, the next thing I'm coming up, being led off to a private set of quarters in a facility that is in Pine Gap, Australia. And he says, it took me a while to adjust to it, he says.
When we were sitting down together with...
There you go. So, I mean, I don't know what to make of that, but, you know, these stories of there being a jump room at S4 that leads to Pine Gap have certainly been around, and we're going to get into that as well. But this is from Robert Dean. He'd been told that, I mean, pretty fantastical claims there. So let's probably use that now as a segue to build on what you've just heard and talk about this gentleman by the name of Dan Burish, also goes by the name of Dan Crane. Now, a lot of folks, if they know of this guy, they'll probably think, oh, he's all just full of shit. He's a storyteller. It's been debunked. Certainly has some very interesting stories to tell. I don't know what to make of it. I've not dived into the case of the stories of Dan Burish, but to kind of give you the cliff notes about Dan Burish, if I just pull up my notes here. So Dan Burish, and this is, you know, take all this for what you will, a former Burbank, California police officer and former Scientologist who participated in a number of Cold War era remote viewing experiments in, oh, hang on, sorry, that's not, I'm talking about someone else there. That is someone we're going to come to a little later on. That is not, there we go. So scrap that, redact all of that. Dan Burish, here we go. Dan Burish, also known as Danny B. Crane, was born on February 2nd, 1964 in Los Angeles, California. He is, or claims to be, a microbiologist who claims to have worked on classified projects at Area 51, including interactions with an extraterrestrial being nicknamed J-Rod, and involvement with the secretive Majestic 12 group, allegedly formed to investigate alien activities. Burish studied microbiology and psychology at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, earning a bachelor's degree in biological sciences in 1985. Bachelor's in psychology in 1986 and a PhD in 1989. He was reportedly the youngest member elected to the Los Angeles Microscopical Society. His claims include working on cloning alien viruses and participating in projects like Project Looking Glass, which purportedly involved time travel or Stargate travel, as well as seeking immunity to testify about design of viruses and Black Ops projects in a congressional hearing. These assertions have sparked significant controversy, with some viewing him as a whistleblower exposing government secrets, while others, including posts found on X and online discussions, label him a grifter, promoting unverified conspiracy theories. So there you go. So that's kind of giving you the cliff notes about Dan Burish. And we'll come to that other gentleman that I started talking about in just a moment. So why are we talking about Dan Burish? Now, what may be interesting for many of you to know, if you're not already aware of this, that Dan Burish is entered into the congressional record. Now, why do we know this? Because in last year, Michael Shellenberger testified before the House Oversight Committee, and he basically has a record. So his testimony, his written testimony, was entered into the congressional record, but he also, as part of his testimony, he included, it's an extensive document, it's 212 pages. He included, where I come to it, an appendix, a UAP timeline appendix attached after the endnotes. So let's type in Burish. I think, see if it was any earlier up here. There we go. So this is all public domain. So, Michael Shellenberger had obviously, he'd done his homework and he'd looked at an extensive timeline of, UFO, UAP history. So public domain, October 2006. Lawrence Livermore, National Laboratory Physicist Henry Deacon, that's a pseudonym, claims he is employed by a 3-letter agency and that he corroborates, coming down to the other highlighted part, Deacon corroborates testimony by Dan Burish, who claims ET groups are concerned about affecting Earth's current timeline for different outcomes they're interested in. Deacon claims Project Looking Glass may have been real and utilizes time viewing technology given to the US government by ET. Deacon claims some ET groups are our own ancestors from different futures, and nuclear weapon testing and high energy physics testing has created time loops upon time loops. It's all a mess, being the quote. Now come down to 2008. Where is it? Here it is. Public domain, 2008. In 2008, Dan Burish claims to have been a microbiologist working at Papu's Lake facility, S4, and claims to have been involved in a project Aquarius, investigating an extraterrestrial entity, J-Rod, which we just mentioned briefly, and its neuropathy. Burish claims he was a pro-tem member of Majestic 12, MJ9. I've never heard of MJ9 before, and dealt with extraterrestrial human lineage and time travel information. Burish claims Project Looking Glass involved a reverse-engineered time viewing device, and that there were 3 extraterrestrial groups visiting Earth: the P45s, humans from approximately 45,000 years in the future, that were pale and grey alien in appearance. Having lived in an apocalyptic Earth, the P52s, from 52,000 years in the future. So this kind of all, is of very much the Mike Masters, extra-tempestural future human hypothesis here. This kind of lives in that world, from 52,000 years in the future, of similar appearance, and the P52 Orions, presumably from Orion's belt, who are human-looking and spiritual. Burish claims the P45s and P52s stayed on Earth after a catastrophe, and the P52 Orions left Earth for the Moon and later Mars. Burish claims the P45s are intent on justifying their history and want the catastrophe to occur, while the P52s and P52 Orions, all gets very confusing, do not. Burish also claims a Project Lotus is attempting to utilize ET technology to manipulate human DNA and RNA. So there's all this law stuff we've heard time and time again. So this is actually now entered into the congressional record, which is just crazy to think. Because Project Looking Glass is referenced there in that congressional record, let's talk about what is Project Looking Glass. Now, there are a number of slides that were that were put together about Project Looking Glass, and Michael Shratt, researcher, put together some drawings, some schematics based on testimony from Burish. I believe he had interviewed him. So it kind of goes into talking about this time travel or Stargate device at Area S4. And this is kind of in alignment with what Robert Dean was talking about in that clip you saw before. Level 4S2. If I blow this up, you've got this schematic on screen titled Area S4 Level 42, Alice's Floor. And I'll just read you what the notes are on the side. Level 2 or 4-2 was known as Alice's Floor. This specific floor contained a laboratory for weapons research and development, 3 boardroom rooms, and provisions for emergency supplies. Also located on level 4-2 were 2 specific areas which contained components for Project Sidekick. Level 4-2 was also the location of Project Looking Glass. This device utilized 6 composite electromagnetic fields and a height-adjustable rotating cylinder, which is injected with a specific type of gas. The entire assembly can be rotated 90 degrees from the horizontal axis. This allows scientists to warp the local fabric of space-time, both forward or backwards, by long or short distances relative to the present time. The Project Looking Glass device was used to predict the potential probability of future events. Once the device is turned properly, images of probable future events are projected in open space within the field, similar to a hologram. The data output of the device, images and in some cases sounds, were then captured via high-resolution audio-video capture devices. If multiple probabilities of the same event were displayed, they could be de-interlaced by use of specific software platforms. Next to the Project Looking Glass device were 2 transport pads, which could teleport physical matter or humans from one location to the other instantly, but not always reliably, with certain disastrous outcomes during testing phases. This all sounds very Star Trek-y to me. If you've seen the first Star Trek film, that last sentence will probably ring true. And if you're familiar with Bob Lazar's story, these projects, Project Looking Glass, Project Sidekick, Project Aquarius, Project Galileo, these are all projects that Bob Lazar has talked about over the years. Now, did Dan Burish take what he heard about Bob Lazar and appropriate it for his own story? Or is there something more truthful to it? I actually have no idea. Absolutely no idea. It's all very, very fantastical for me to kind of entertain. But if we look at this document, that at the bottom it says AutoCAD drawing by Michael Shratt on the in 2010 per Dan Burish testimony and sketches. Now, what's interesting, at the left of the Alice's Floor, which is highlighted, what does it say? It says Pine Gap. So these teleport pads, departure point, Area S4 in Nevada, destination point could have been the Abydos Temple, the Zeta Star System, and Pine Gap, Australia. Yep. Make of this what you will. I really don't know what to make of all of this. And then the slide deck goes into the Project Looking Glass device, into more detail. So let's actually hear from maybe someone that had put these schematics together. Let's hear directly from maybe Michael Shratt, who can probably add a little bit more context for what you've just seen in brief. So at the UFO Congress a number of years ago, Michael Shratt was talking about that schematic and Project Looking Glass specifically. So let me play this for you.
Moving into the facility, the first thing you'll see when you look and walk into level 4-2 is a 3-foot tall statue of an Alice in Wonderland rabbit. There's a symbolic message that they're giving you here. There's a primary looking glass device, and then on either side of that primary looking glass device, ladies and gentlemen, there are 2 secondary ERBs or Einstein-Rosen bridges. Up on the left, I've got a graphic of what we have termed the galactic positioning codes, because when you access a Stargate at the S4 facility, you don't need to have a galactic positioning code on your arm or flip book, because all that data is inside the control room. But when you go outside S4, you do need to get this positioning code data so that you know where you're going. Here we've got the jump pads at 4-2. And then down here, we've got the Project Sidekick storage facility. There's also one just below that. To the right, we've got weapons research and development. I've got a blown up view of the looking glass device here. We're going to consider something called the doctrine of convergent timeline paradox. And then we're also going to consider, how did the US government get the technology to access naturally occurring stargates throughout the world? It has to do with the Sumerian cylinder seals that were recovered in Baghdad years ago.
Again, yeah, take that for what you will. I really don't know what to make of it, but again, because there's reference there to Pine Gap, I thought I would cover it. So, to me, and I actually, just for reference, I wanted to see if there was any additional context that Michael Shratt could provide about that reference to Pine Gap. So I actually, tweeted to him on X. I didn't receive a reply, but it would certainly be interesting to learn, well, where did that Pine Gap reference come from? Why? What's the genesis of Pine Gap being referenced in that specific schematic? So again, take all of this for what you will with massive grains of salt. To me, if you ask me personally, this to me sounds very science fiction and straight out of a movie that I'm a fan of, John Carpenter's They Live, which came out, when did that come out? In 1988. And this is a short clip from this film. This is all happening around the same sort of time. 89, Bob Lazar. 88, They Live comes out. Dan Burish, these schematics drawn in 2010. So have a look at this clip from They Live, John Carpenter's They Live in 1998, and you decide for yourself. So there you go. So is this all life imitating art or art imitating life? I have no idea. But how do you separate the wheat from the chaff and all this stuff? It's impossible. Again, I take all of this with massive grains of salt. I really don't know what to make of it all. But what is interesting, if we come back, I'd be keen to know what you guys think. Is Dan Burish legit? Is there truth to what he's talking about, or is it all a complete work of fiction, the work of a grifter, so to speak? Again, I honestly have no idea. However, there was someone that I interviewed on the podcast very, very early on. One of my first interviews was with a gentleman called, make sure I got the lights on here, John Rixey Moore, who's an actor, who is a UAP enthusiast and researcher, and he has a very interesting connection to the subject that we're talking about. He actually befriended Dan Burish and had Dan spend a weekend with him at his cabin in California. And during the interview, which you can find on this channel, the Unexplained Rundown, he talked about his time with Dan Burish. So let me play this clip for you. This is basically, I was asking, he goes, Rixey, he prefers to be called Rixey. I asked him, well, what do you make of Dan Burish's claims that he relayed to you? So let me show you this clip. How did you come into knowing about Dr. Dan Burish, and how did that association with him begin? How did you meet him and get to know him?
I met a man named Ron Garner, who had befriended Dan Burish and had helped protect him when there were efforts to actually harm him. Ron Garner has since gone to his celestial interview, and he hooked me in. I was sitting in an Italian restaurant. Someone had told him some things about me, I guess, that roused his curiosity. So he came in and he said, I know a man who knows an alien. And I said, well, that's sweet.
What a way to start the conversation.
I did some videos for Ron Garner, and met many times. He pulled a meeting together of ladies who've all been abducted, impregnated, and had their fetus removed. That was an interesting afternoon. These these are people who have access to fascinating people that nobody's ever heard of before. As I said, Ron has since passed away, but in my multiple meetings with him, I was introduced to Dan. Dan came up to my house where I lived in the mountains north of Los Angeles and spent a weekend, and I got to sit on the sofa and ask him questions for 6 hours.
Pick his brain. There are people coming forward that make these claims of extraordinary things where they they had an experience where they met aliens in a tunnel under a mountain, but there's been no proof to support their claims and so on. So I guess the maxim that is often quoted, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, which I believe is attributed to the late Carl Sagan. I don't agree entirely with that quote. I think extraordinary claims simply require verifiable evidence. So what was it that convinced you or satisfied your curiosity that what Dr. Burish was telling you was in fact legitimate, that this guy is the real deal?
It was just his matter-of-fact way of talking. He wasn't dramatizing anything. He didn't seem to have to tuck away a fact that we weren't ready for yet. He just answered my questions about this extraordinary job that he's got. In the theater, you talk to people who are lying all the time, and
they lie for a living, don't they?
Dan is just a completely unpretentious, kind little man. He's not a big guy, and he has since married his bodyguard, a woman named Marcia, who was assigned to him when his original wife tried to kill him. That's another story. That's on the human side. But he seemed to feel really protected when he was up in the mountains with Ron Garner and me. He spent the night, and I took him off to a restaurant where some friends of mine who make their own wine gave us all big steaks, and we drove back up to my house. It was just a really nice vacation for him to get out of the cage he's in. But like a lot of people with extraordinary intelligence, I think he has what we would call a boring life. He does what he's told to do, and that becomes the parameter of his interests. And as extraordinary and fantastic and mind-blowing as it might be to one of us, he's been in this business and living among extraordinary secrets for over 20 years. And, it's a way of life.
So there you go. So there's perspective from someone that had befriended Dan and obviously had got to know him quite well and listened to him firsthand of his accounts. Wonderful man, John Rixey Moore, just a very, very great guy that's generous of his time. Why I tracked down John Rixey Moore, for those of you that are interested to know, I obviously have somewhat of an obsession with Kurt Russell, my favorite actor. And John Rixey Moore was actually in the film Executive Decision with Kurt Russell. It was back in 1996, I believe it came out. And so there is a scene in the film Executive Decision where John Rixey Moore and Kurt Russell share the screen. And it's in the opening scene where Kurt Russell, his character, can't remember the character's name, but David Grant, I think is the character's name. And so David Grant, Kurt Russell's character, is learning to get his pilot's license, and he's just about to do his solo flight. This is his last flight with the instructor. And what is interesting of this plane? Two things. Now, some of you will already know this based on watching previous episodes of the Unexplained Rundown. But this plane that is used in the film Executive Decision is actually owned by John Rixey Moore. It's his personal plane. Kurt and John Rixey Moore are both avid pilots. They're good friends. Kurt Russell asked John Rixey Moore if he could borrow his plane on a number of occasions, and they actually stored their planes in a similar, in the same area, or the same hangars, the same series of hangars in Santa Monica. And so what is interesting about this image is that for those of you that are fans of Guardians of the Galaxy, when Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 came out in, I think it was 2017, and Kurt Russell was giving Guardians of the Galaxy 2 a plug on the One Show for the BBC, he revealed to the world that he was the pilot that reported, he was the civil aviation pilot that reported to air traffic control on the 13th of March, 1997, the Phoenix Lights. And in that interview on the BBC's The One Show, Kurt Russell mentions the tail sign 2 Tango Sierra. And what do you see on this plane? N for November, 2 TS, Tango Sierra. This is the plane that Kurt Russell flew to Phoenix on the night of the 13th of March, 1997. And this is the scene that John Rixey Moore shares with Kurt Russell. So talk about synchronicities. I covered Kurt Russell and the Phoenix Lights. I did a documentary on it, one of my first videos on the channel. So if you're interested to see all of that and how it all kind of comes together, it was truly fascinating for me to kind of discover this all the time. And I was grateful that I was able to get John Rixey Moore on the channel for an interview where he talks about, obviously, his friendship with Kurt Russell and how it all went down, that Kurt Russell borrowed his plane and flew to Phoenix with his stepson, Oliver Hudson, on the evening of 13 March 1997. And obviously, you're also fascinated to discover that John Rixey Moore had a friendship with Dan Burish. And John Rixey Moore has had his own UFO sightings and experiences. So, yeah, just crazy how it all kind of came together. But if you're interested to learn more about Dan Burish, again, take it for what you will. I take it all with a grain of salt. There is a wonderful YouTube channel out there, and I follow this gentleman on X. Brian Jackson has put together, he's curated a ton of interviews that Dan Burish has done over the years and presentations that he's done at conferences and so on. And he's even done his own deep dive investigation into Dan Burish. He's got a channel called the Burish Archives and also a website that has a lot of background information on Dan Burish. If you're interested to, look into it a bit further, feel free. That is a great one-stop shop for all things Dan Burish. You'll find a lot of interviews on the man himself. So feel free to take a look at that if it's of interest to you. Now, Short Order Cook 1 asked, if I pull this up, is there a link to that document you're reading from? I don't. I'll try and find the link. I think I actually just pulled it from Scribed, but if I find it again, I'll put it in the show notes below. So if you're interested to have a look at that Project Looking Glass slide deck, you can. I think if you just do a Google search, you'll probably find it. But I'll try and remember to put that in there. All right, so let's now move away from Dan Burish and let's come back to Ross and his follow-up comments. He was asked the question about Pine Gap. So let's now use that as a segue to cover off on another connection to Pine Gap.
Who love a good conspiracy theory. I'm sure there will be many people who remind me of this. The remote viewers that were operated by the CIA during the 70s and the 80s, they picked a location called Mount Zeil, which is only about 120 kilometers west of Pine Gap, as being the alleged location for a base for non-human intelligences. I've never been able to confirm this. I've had a look at the area. The bottom line is you don't see anything other than scrub and dirty outback desert. But I am intrigued by Pine Gap. It is the most secret facility in Australia. Our government very rarely talks about it. And yes, it is a hotbed of UAP activity. And to answer the broader question from the person asking the question, Australia really has its head in the sand on the UAP issue. The government officially has no interest in UAPs. It declaims any knowledge at all in monitoring them. And it's going to be very interesting to see, because we know that Dr. John Kozlowski, the current ARROW boss, in evidence last year, he acknowledged that he would be reaching out to Five Eyes partners to ask them to start collecting UAP evidence. And it's going to be very interesting to see whether the Australian government accedes to that request. At the moment, from multiple questions that have been asked in our parliament by different people, it's quite clear that we're still in an era of denial and ridicule and taboo directed towards the UAP subject, even though Australia has its own fair share of UAP sightings.
There you go. Very true. Unfortunately, for the Australian government and Department of Defence publicly, the UAP issue is a nothing burger. But I have my suspicions, and if I was to make an educated guess, I would say conversations are very different behind closed doors. So we're going to use that as a segue to now transition to Mount Zeil, which many of you will know about. I've covered it in brief on the channel before. So let's pull up, if you're wondering where on earth, first and foremost, is Pine Gap, well, let's just pull up our good friend. I don't know if I can do increase the size of this. No. All right. So let's just pull up Pine Gap. Oops, we don't want to look at Area 51. Not Pine Hap, but Pine Gap. And let's take, let's do a bit of a jump. Now let's teleport to Pine Gap. So here is Pine Gap, 18 kilometers south of Alice Springs. Let's just center it a little bit there. And so we're from Alice Springs. Let's go back to our 3D view again. Where is Mount Zeil? So let's jump on out over to Mount Zeil. Can I move that back? I don't think I can. There we go. And so let's now have a look at Mount Zeil. We zoom in a touch. So this is Mount Zeil. So what is there to say about Mount Zeil? Now, it's the highest peak in the Northern Territory of Australia, standing at 1.5 kilometers. The name Mount Zeil is a, hang on a sec. The mountain is named after the Count von Zeil, a German nobleman, by explorer Ernest Gillies in 1872. Mount Zeil, if I come to my slide deck again and get off good old Google Earth there. Actually, you know what? Let's, just so you can see. Oh, no, that's all right. We'll do it. Just so you can see how far it is from Pine Gap or Alice Springs to Mount Zeil. I think it's about 140 kilometers. There we go. There we go. Let's have a look. Let's just pull this up. Why is this? Oh, crap it. There you go. How do I get my terrain? There we go. So this shows you, hang on, let me just make sure. There we go. Is that Alice Springs? There we go. Okay, so let me pull this up so you can see it. Apologies, folks. I just wanted to give you a visual frame of reference for what it is we're looking at. So here is a little bit hard on the eyes. This is Alice Springs here, and here is Pine Gap here. So it's southwest 18 k's of Alice Springs. So where is Mount Zeil? Well, Mount Zeil, if we zoom on out, is over, where is it? Where'd it go? You know what? Let me just put the address in again so you can see. There you go. So it's kind of, what's that? You know, northwest of Pine Gap. So, you know, pretty remote place, a bit hard to obviously get to, but it is a tourist attraction. You can make your way out there. So let's now transition and talk about Mount Zeil and why it's important as it pertains to the UFO topic. So as we mentioned, Mount Zeil is the highest peak in the Australian Northern Territory, located west of Alice Springs and near the secretive Pine Gap facility. Become a focal point for UFO sightings and ET speculation. While less documented than Pine Gap itself, Mount Zeil's remote location and cultural significance to the Western Aranite people have contributed to its reputation as a supposed UFO hotspot. The history of UFO sightings there is largely anecdotal, intertwined with conspiracy theories, and lacks official confirmation, but it spans decades and is amplified by the region's mystique. And obviously someone, I don't know if this is legit, if someone's photoshopped this, but maybe it is. Intergalactic shopping mall located 600 meters below your feet. So let's talk about Mount Zeil. Now, recently, Hal Puthoff was interviewed on Joe Rogan, and he talked about Mount Zeil and its connection to remote viewing. So let's give it a watch.
One of our remote viewers that was really good came up one day and said, I was looking around and I think I found a UFO base on Earth. This is during the remote viewing era, and oh my God, I've got to report this to my CIA contract monitor. And do I want to tell him that? And so I did, and one of the places he came up with but one of the places he came up with was Mount Zeil in Australia. And so my CIA contract monitor says, well, I know the station keeper, CIA station keeper out in Australia. I think I'll call him, and I won't tell him why I'm asking, but I'll ask him about Mount Zeil area. So he gave him a call, and he said, I'd like to ask you about that Mount Zeil area. And he says, oh, you mean where the UFOs are always flying around? Whoa. So I thought, oh, gee, So this was from Pat Price. I take him seriously.
So there you go. So who is Pat Price? So let's pull back up the deck. Now, Pat Price was one of the remote viewers. He's on the right there. This is Hal Puthoff. This is, I think, 1975. That's Hal Puthoff. That's Christopher Kit Green, and that's Russell Targ. And Pat Price, I believe, died in 1975. But he is very, very interesting in his connection with remote viewing and Mount Zeil. Now, what is the connection? Now, we know that, let's talk about who was Pat Price. So let me give you a quick summary of Pat Price. I've got my notes here. And I started talking about this guy before, confused him as Burish, but it's not. So Pat Price, a former Burbank, California police officer and former Scientologist. They kind of like to, birds of a feather, they flock together, don't they? These science. Hal studied Scientology for a while, so they certainly like to hang around in groups. Former Scientologist who participated in a number of Cold War era remote viewing experiments, including the US government-sponsored project, is it Scanate or Stargate? SCANATE, Scanate, and the Stargate project. Price joined the program after a chance encounter with fellow Scientologists at the time, Hal Puthoff and Ingo Swann, near SRI, Stanford Research International. Working with maps and photographs provided to him by the CIA, Price claimed to have been able to retrieve information from facilities behind Soviet lines. He is probably best known for his sketches of cranes and gantries, which appeared to conform to CIA intelligence photographs. At the time, the CIA took his claims very seriously. And we know that, Pat Price is certainly was taken seriously by the CIA, because I'll show you a document here This is a document that was released in 2002 by the CIA. This was 29th of April 1975, and it's a transcript subject interview with Mr. Patrick H. Price, re-grid coordinates, an experimental remote viewing program designed to provide operational leads on various targets. So he was, obviously taken very, very seriously by the CIA, and obviously coordinates given with Pat. Oh, wouldn't you know, redacted. So that tells you that it was obviously taken seriously. Now, what's interesting about Pat Price is that that account that Hal Putoff just mentioned, talking about Mount Zeil. Now, what you can find on the internet are the Pat Price remote viewing transcripts. The amazing Pat Price and his secret UFO remote viewing of 1973 by Daz Smith and friends. So this is a report, but in this report, it includes information about, it includes Pat Price's notes, transcript of his remote viewing of Mount Zeil, and it all becomes part of this Project 8200. Now let me zoom on in so you can see what this is. So Project 8200. One day in 1973, Pat Price walked into the office of Hal Putoff, tossed a file photo on his desk, and said, "You might be interested in these UFO bases." In the early 1980s, Putoff passed the same folder to a gentleman by the name of Skip Atwater, saying, "You might be interested in this." This led to Project 8200, which was an unofficial project instigated by Skip Atwater to utilize second-generation Stargate remote viewers in an attempt to verify or refute the 1972-1973 UAP alien data provided by Pat Price to Hal Putoff. And so the full Pat Price alien-based document, well, Pat Price gives, in these documents that he passed over to Hal Putoff, coordinates for Mount Zeil. Now, the spelling is incorrect. That's a common misspelling. It's actually spelled Z-E-I-L, not Z-I-E-L. So just take note of that. It's just a misspelling. I don't think there's anything nefarious about it. But these are the notes from Pat Price. And you can clearly see in his notes, there is Australia reference to Mount Zeil spelt incorrectly with coordinates. And then that is obviously typed out. So if it's a bit hard to identify what's legible in the transcripts, you can see that. So let's move on down. So then this is also from Pat Price's notes. And I'll read this out for you. I've highlighted it on the right, and it's included. It's been transcribed on the left. So there seems to be different function for each of the four sites. Site 4 was Zeil, a personnel center. 1, personnel for all bases. 2, Homo sap intro point. That seems to be the reason for the better theta detection at Zeil. This area should be approached with caution. In fact, the whole area is under alert right now. So for a time, I'm going to look elsewhere. Again, these are Pat Price's notes. Now, what does that all mean? It's hard to tell. Received October 7, 1973. I'll leave it at this size because I can't read anything that's smaller. And if I zoom in, I won't be able to read Pat Price's notes. So Mount Zeil, this station is located facing west-northwest at 4,000 feet level. Standing in launch recovery area, I'm looking out over the great sandy desert area. It's very interesting that this unit appears to have the greatest number of personnel. Frankly, I expected this site to have the least personnel. For one thing, there are personnel from the other 3 sites here, like a rest and recreation area. Felt slightly disorientated for a few moments, decided they may have detected me, so led them to Melbourne. There's a scientist there who is known to be very interested in the Great Sandy Desert and is preparing an expedition for a year's research. Locked them onto him, and the disorientation disappeared. Back at the site, there are vehicles here from all the other sites. The ID on the units are different. And so they're the notes pertaining to Mount Zeil. Now, you don't really see anything in there about there's no reference of extraterrestrial or anything of that nature, but that was what Pat Price presented to Hal Puthoff. Now, you may, if you're a watcher of this show, you may recall that I covered Project 8200 because last year, the Y-Files, that do some great stuff, entertaining as well, did an entire episode on these underground alien bases that were allegedly remote viewed by Pat Price. And then in 1982, Skip Atwater gave this file to another remote reviewer, Joe McGonagle, and asked him to remote view the coordinates. Now, didn't tell him anything about, obviously, what, basically asked if he could remote view the coordinates that Pat Price had included in his notes to Hal Puthoff. And so this is from the Y-Files, and I've put this in the show notes below. This is now jumping forward to 1982, when Joe McGonagle remote viewed Mount Zeil and added to what Pat Price had included in his notes. So this is from the Y-Files.
Joe was told the coordinates of Mount Zeil in Australia.
The yawning entrance to a underground cave. Black doorway. Like a smooth dome of concrete. A black hole. The storage site of some kind. I see just a collage of things buried. Just coils. Keep seeing boxes of electronics.
Under Mount Zeil, Joe sees another facility with advanced technology. Then he sees something familiar.
Keep envisioning control centers. You've been getting visions of all the command and control centers that I've ever been in.
Joe describes an underground command center. Later, other remote viewers would describe consoles and screens, and what sounds a lot like NORAD.
Reference to caretaker personnel. Do you have visuals of them, or? No, I just perceive like a watchdog force or something there. What kind of emotional impact was this on? Oh, it's a very, I have a very sinister feeling for this target.
So again, take all of this for what you will with a grain of salt, but it's interesting that there was such a dedicated effort into remote viewing, and clearly from that CIA document that was redacted talks about Pat Price, and obviously now we have in 1982, another famed remote viewer, Joe McGonagle, talking about what he is viewing at Mount Zeil. Now, this is another part of that episode of the Y-Files where, again, Joe McGonagle's findings from that remote view, they kind of got Skip Atwater, who was leading Project 8200, interested to maybe dive a little deeper. So this is now the Y-Files talking about not the fallout, but what happened as a result of what Joe McGonagle had remote viewed at Mount Zeil.
Confirmation of UFO bases, that's when Skip Atwater decided he'd had enough. His project had limited resources, and if other agencies found out they were spending so much time searching for UFOs, that could be the end of the project, and the end of many people's reputations. But something was nagging Skip. He kept asking himself, is any of this true? Well, he knew the CIA station chief in Northern Australia, so decided to give him a call. He asked his friend in Australia, hey, is anything unusual happening down there? The guy said, nah, this is a dead assignment. Well, except for all the UFOs flying around Mount Zeil.
There you go. Now, that's not entirely accurate, and I'll tell you why. Because recently, that very gentleman, Skip Atwater, was on the Shawn Ryan show. And Skip Atwater has authored a book where you can learn about Project 8200. If I pull this up for you, where is it? There we go. He has a book that he's authored called Captain of My Ship, Master of My Soul. And he has, one of the menus is Project 8200, where he actually talks about the remote viewers, the project, obviously. Let me zoom on in so it's a bit easier on the eyes here. And he talks about the mission list of Project 8200, the remote viewing mission list. And again, there is some information regarding Mount Zeil. Pat Price, he puts a quote in here. This is from Pat Price. This unit appears to have the greatest number of personnel. Frankly, I expected this site to have the least personnel. Again, we've read this already from Pat Price's notes. For one thing, there are personnel from the other 3 sites here, like a rest and recreation area. There are vehicles here from all the other sites. The ID on the units are different. Also, from now until further notice, Site 4 will issue all flight orders and control of flights. Again, I don't have a context for any of that. But then, Joe McGonagle, August 1982. This is his account of his remote viewing of Mount Zeil. The target area is underground. I perceived an entry to the underground area. I have a very sinister feeling for this target. And we've heard this just from Joe McGonagle in that clip from the Y-Files. I have a very sinister feeling for this target, but it doesn't threaten anything. It seems to be defensive in nature. I sense a feeling of control, protection, and waiting. Very little activity. Very few people. Caretaker type. An underground cave. White dish shape. Storage site. Coils. Boxes of electronics. Can't break it down. Electronics. They're not electronics. Pulsing patterns like a glow. Of all the command and control centers that I've ever been in. So I've added the link to Skip Atwater's website, where you can learn more about obviously his book and Project 8200. But this is where the Y-Files got it a little bit wrong. It wasn't actually Skip Atwater who connected with the station chief in Australia to see, have you guys, what's going on down there with these, he was basically just checking to see if he could corroborate information that had come from Joe McGonagle. But it wasn't Skip Atwater, and let's have a look and I'll tell you why.
He came in and on Puthoff's desk, he said, you might be interested in this. I've been interested in this for a while, and I've found 4 UFO bases around the globe. And so you really ought to look at it. And
4 UFO bases.
Yes.
And this just came in just completely random one day. This ad comes in and here it is. 4 UFO bases around the world. Where were they? Or where are they?
Yes, they're still there. This all happened 50 years ago, a little bit more than that now. Mount Nyangani, which is a country in Africa, isolated country. Mount Hayes is up in Australia. Mount Perdido is on the border of Spain and France. And then there's one in Australia, which I can't quite remember the name of that up in Australia.
Hayes is in Alaska, correct?
Hayes is in Alaska, yes.
Okay.
Zeil, I think, might be the one down in Australia. So this was an interesting problem for Puthoff to deal with. He says, we're watching Pat in our program here and testing and evaluating our program here at SRI. These look interesting. What is it about this that, pulls me to it? So it turns out that he calls up a friend of his called Ken Kress and says, Kit Green, and calls Kit Green, and they're friends from a long time ago when they were junior officers. Now, Kit Green is in the CIA. He went that way, and Puthoff went into being a research scientist, but they're really good friends. So he calls up Kit and says, could you do me a favor? And said, what's that? Well, I was wondering how things are going down in Australia. Do you know who the case officer is down in Australia, the station chief or whatever you call him? And he says, well, yeah. He said, well, I'm just kind of interested in what things are like in Australia now. I'd like to maybe go down there someday. And so he says, well, let me give him a call. And so a couple of days later, he calls back and said, yeah, I talked to the station chief down there, and he said they really like it. They get along with the Australians just fine. They share things and work together on things. And I really like it here, too. I hope I don't get reassigned very often. Well, there is that one thing. It's all those UFOs up north. And Putoff is like, oh, well, that's kind of an interesting thing, but otherwise you really like it down there, and you, I don't know. And so Putoff wasn't going to say anything. He says, we ought to get together next time you're back in the States here. We'll go out and have a beer again. Remember how a good time we had when we were young officers together? He said, yeah, let's do that. Let's get together again. And so then Putoff had those on his desk and told Pat, don't ever do this again. Go get working. You're not to do things alone. You have to follow protocol. We're being paid by an outside agency, and we have to follow our protocol, else we'll get fired. So you need to not ever do this again. Only do the things that Targ is working with you in the interview room next door. You do what things we're telling you to do so that we're in control and we can tell the CIA what we're doing.
So there's a lot to unpack there. But what's interesting is you'll remember in Hal Puthoff, in his interview with his sit down with Joe Rogan, he only mentioned his CIA monitor. And so now, thanks to Skip Atwater, we know that Hal's CIA monitor was his good friend and Kit Green, who worked with the CIA. So it was not, as AJ from the Y-Files indicated, that it was Skip Atwater that reached out to the station chief in Australia. It was actually Kit Green who reached out to the station chief in Australia. Now, you're wondering, well, who is the station chief for Australia at the time? And that information is publicly available information. So I was able to find out that there was an article done by the Sydney Morning Herald in 2019, and it talks about a gentleman called John Walker. And it was John Walker, the CIA station chief in Canberra. Now, the CIA had two Far East divisions in Australia. They had an office in Canberra, in the capital, Australian Capital Territory for Australia, and in Melbourne. They didn't have, I don't believe they had a Northern Australia station chief. My understanding, it was just the station chief who was based in Canberra. And so it was John Walker, the CIA station chief in Canberra, in the early to mid 1970s, who some years later told, and again, remember, Pat Price happened, his notes was 1973, McGonagle was 1982, so this all kind of aligns up. Mid-70s, who some years later told to have a lunch in New York that his counterpart, ASIO's then most senior officer in Canberra, had been conducting a clandestine affair with Walker's wife. So John Walker was a bit piffed that his wife was having an affair with an Australian Secret Intelligence Organization officer. Now, so we know that John Walker is the CIA station chief. Now, there is another article that is also publicly available on the great reporting that the Australian Strategic Policy Institute do. This was in 2016, and talks about the CIA basically. And again, we have a reference to John Walker. Now, this is where it gets interesting about Pine Gap. One attempt to interfere in Australian politics failed at least initially. Where is it? Did I go too fast? Okay. There we go. A retired CIA station chief in Australia, John Walker, told me he had urged Barbara in early 1973 to publicly brand Whitlam, this is Gough Whitlam, the Prime Minister of Australia, a liar. Barbara refused. Others within ASIO then leaked supporting material. Walker greatly admired the CIA's counterintelligence chief, James Angleton. Where have we heard of James Jesus Angleton before? Connected to the UFO topic and JFK assassination. Chief James Angleton, whom he said considered Whitlam a serious threat to the US. Angleton, who frequently visited Australia during the Whitlam period, was eventually sacked for making preposterous accusations about respected Western leaders. He even suspected Kissinger was a KGB agent. And so let's now jump down to reference to Pine Gap. According to Edwards Tang, this is the focus of this article, is hugely agitated over Whitlam's handling of US concerns in November 1975 about the CIA satellite station at Pine Gap. So this kind of all ties in. John Walker had a hand in, with James Jesus Angleton, who wanted to, out Whitlam and may have been successful in doing so. So very interesting to learn that this CIA station chief for Australia, around this time that this is all happening in the 70s, when Pat Price is remote viewing these alien bases, one of which is at Mount Zeil, I have filed a FOIA request with the CIA to see if there are any records for John Walker in 1973, because one would assume that if this file was handed to Hal Puthoff by Pat Price in 1973, then around that time or shortly thereafter, Hal Puthoff's CIA contract manager Kit Green, contract monitor, I should say, Kit Green, would have reached out to John Walker. So I've put in a FOIA request for records for John Walker that pertain to Mount Zeil and UFOs. Now, I haven't done any keyword searches on remote viewing or Pat Price. I just want to see if there's anything that pops up on Mount Zeil or UFOs in general, because that is what both Hal Puthoff and Skip Atwater have said came from this CIA station chief's mouth, Mount Zeil and UFOs. So very, very interesting. So I hope this has been interesting for you folks with what we've covered with respect to Pine Gap and UAP, UFOs. There's obviously so much more we could cover off on. I want to keep things moving along because I do want to get out of here under the 3-hour limit, under the 3-hour mark. And I know there's been a ton of great questions and comments that have been put through. So we'll get to those as we go through. But I do want to segue and now talk about, which is very, very hot topic at the moment, Harold Malmgrom, who we know was interviewed shortly before his death by Jesse Michaels on the American Alchemy podcast. And so why is it important? Because I've been following quite closely the Bluegill Triple Prime case of 1962, which fellow Aussie and researcher Jeff Crookshank has done a hell of a lot of research on. And in this interview with Harold Malmgrom, Jesse Michaels and Harold talk about, and Pippa talk about, the Bluegill Triple Prime incident. So let me play this first clip for you, so you can, and we can kind of talk about it on the other side. So let me play this this first one.
The last few tests of this series were the Bluegill tests, which involved a unique X-ray based missile defense system. And Harold was put in charge of doing all of the cost assessments for this test.
Tell us about the Bluegill Triple Prime test.
Well, I arrived in Washington summer of '62. In '61, there were 2 high-level tests of an incoming missile and an interceptor fired up to see if they could stop it. And those 2 tests failed. summer of '62, I arrived, and first I'm in the middle of this missile crisis. And then before it's barely over, Hal, would you set up a small group? We'll give you the people to devise the outlines of an anti-missile system so that we can start anticipating for the future. I said, yeah, that's something that DARPA should do with a vast. They said, no, what we want is a concise, top, back of the envelope calculation. What should be the elements of it? What would it cost? And how much would it cost for the enemy to offset it? And I said, okay, I'll take it on. And I got that assignment. I'm thinking, holy cow, this is huge. And they gave me these people on the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the Weapons Systems Evaluation Group. Who am I talking to these guys?
Missile defense was a major priority for the United States in the heart of the Cuban Missile Crisis. While American offensive nuclear capabilities were ahead of the Soviets, the US still didn't have precise ways of defending against a nuclear attack. But there were some novel ideas in missile defense at the time. In 1961, the RAND Corporation wrote a report called Some New Considerations Concerning the Nuclear Test Ban, which highlighted the susceptibility of the US ICBM reentry vehicles to high-energy X-rays.
To say this is a piece of steel and it's in outer space, if you impinge high-energy X-rays on this side, so what that does is blows chunks off the inside at hypersonic speeds.
This novel insight made its way into the Operation Dominic Marshall Islands tests. Here's where it gets interesting. These X-ray emissions could also take out surrounding UFOs.
Now, this is where it gets interesting. So this is where Jeff Crookshank has done a ton of research, and part 2 of this interview Jesse Michaels does with Harold Malmgrom. Malmgrom talks about this again in a bit more detail.
KC-135 aircrafts in proximity of the test were gathering footage. Australian intelligence analyst Jeffrey Crookshank, who's done the most in-depth analysis of this test, calls these two pieces of footage Kettle 1 and Kettle 2.
A bright, fiery object tumbles out from within the nuclear fireball. You believe that that is some kind of craft? Just like the one that was following the Atlas 8F test, but this time it was a real warhead.
You can see clearly from the Kettle 1 footage of the nuclear blast, an unidentified flying object tumble out of the nuclear fireball. The official report written about this test at the time was written by the Flight Dynamics Laboratory at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. The report tries to explain the presence of this second thermal source in the footage. Quote unquote, there is no evidence to indicate that even the closest pod was ever immersed in the fireball, so it definitely wasn't one of the instrumentation pods on the missile. If that's not weird enough, these videos were declassified to the public in 1998. At the declassification review, the Defense Special Weapons Agency, led by Dr. Byron L. Ristvet, applied a large white triangle to the footage, sanitizing it, right where you can see the object tumbling out of the plume in the Kettle 1 footage.
There's well-known animosity between Los Alamos and Lawrence Livermore Labs. Lawrence Livermore ran one aircraft, Los Alamos ran the other. The reason why the Kettle 1 footage was declassified and Kettle 2 wasn't was simply a personal difference in what should remain classified and what shouldn't.
Then on October 21st, 2023, when Jeffrey Crookshank sent a mandatory declassification review request to the Department of Energy, asking them to declassify this Kettle 2 footage, which had been sanitized. The Department of Energy responded saying that they were unable to locate the footage. They were literally saying they lost the footage of one of their most important high-altitude nuclear tests. And maybe all you need to know is that Bluegill Triple Prime is the only one of the Operation Fishbowl nuclear tests where any portion of the released video is still sanitized and classified to this day.
So, truly fascinating case, the Bluegill Triple Prime, and again, kudos to Jeff for all of the research that he's done to date, and just fascinating to see the connection, that Harold Malmgrom claims to have had with Bluegill Triple Prime. So, we're going to talk more about this. I want to keep the ball rolling because, again, of time. But recently, on the most recent episode of Need to Know, Ross talked about Harold Malmgrom's account of his involvement with Bluegill Triple Prime and how it kind of, validated, I guess, for him the work that Jeff Crookshank has done on the Bluegill Triple Prime case to date. So let me play this clip for you from Ross. Again, just for added context, this is Ross talking about the Harold Malmgrom interview with Jesse Michaels.
Malmgrom basically saying that he was aware from Operation Bluegill, which is the story you and I have told before and discussed before, which involved the explosion of an X-ray emitting thermonuclear device in the upper atmosphere, which allegedly knocked out a UFO, an alien craft. And as my good friend Jeff Crookshank, an Australian former intelligence official, has explained to me, there is video film recorded by the Department of Energy, which has been publicly released, which shows this object falling from the thermonuclear mushroom cloud. It literally was an electromagnetic pulse that knocked out a large part of the Pacific. And as was discovered apparently many years earlier, they realized that the X-rays from these devices can essentially knock out non-human craft. And that's the technique that the US has been using allegedly to down craft since. But Harold says he, as a result of him actually at one stage, touching some of this technology that was recovered from the Bluegill downing, technology which, by the way, he says spoke to him inside his head in some way. He felt a connection. He was briefed into the existence of the program by Richard Bissell, who essentially was one of the senior CIA officials. And Bryce, you'll love this. One of the senior CIA officials whom I suspect had a hand in the eventual slaying of JFK with Allen Dulles.
So that just gives you some commentary from Ross. Let me go straight into another clip where he continues to talk about Bluegill Triple Prime and the research that Jeff has done to date.
What Harold revealed was that a lot of this is buried and was buried in the Department of Energy. Harold had a Q clearance because he'd worked around the issue of nuclear weapons. And it was through the fact that he had a Q clearance that he became aware of the Bluegill test in the Pacific at near Johnson Atoll. And as a result of that, the alleged recovery of the craft during the Bluegill operation. And for me, it's also a vindication for my Australian colleague, Jeff Crookshank, who I know spoke directly with Harold last year when he was doing his research, when he was talking to me about what he'd pieced together about Bluegill. It's fascinating, Bryce, because you've got one arm of the government that released the video. I think it came from Los Alamos National Laboratories. And you've got the other arm now claiming, and they've said this to Jeff, that they can't find their copy of a film where the object was seen to fall from the thermonuclear blast. It really does stretch credibility that the Department of Energy can maintain a line like that. They've somehow lost a crucial piece of evidence that recorded the downing of what we now know from Harold Malmgrom to be the downing of an alien spacecraft.
So there you go. Now, In 2023, I had the good fortune of interviewing Jeff Crookshank, who had not gone public at that point. He went under the moniker on Reddit of Harriers White Hot, and also Ross Coulthart and researcher Bill Chalker on the Unexplained Rundown. So let me play this clip for you. This is from Jeff's mouth directly on his research up until this point in time on the Bluegill Triple Prime incident.
The main one at the moment, Grant, is the Bluegill Triple Prime nuclear test, which it was a very, very odd test in that it failed 3 times previous. That's why it's got the name Triple Prime. The rockets failed in space twice, and one blew up on the launch pad. So I've only just recently seen, was it Colonel Lauren Dietrich come out and say that some missiles were taken out in space previously. This sort of connects with that, and it also ties in with what Tom DeLonge was saying on Jimmy Church's Fade to Black radio show before he knew his emails had been hacked, where he didn't mention Neil McCaslin or John Podesta, but 10 days after that interview where he said they actually shot one down, and he says that the Soviets and the Americans were working together to do that. Now, these tests, particularly Bluegill Triple Prime, I believe was a special warhead that used X-rays. It was an enhanced X-ray warhead. And initially I thought it was an EMP effect from the blast, but I've spoken to scientists that were actually there at the time and wrote reports that are still restricted data classified, and they said that the EMP effect of Bluegill Triple Prime was fairly localized. And funnily enough, the guy that ran the science data for Starfish Prime collected all the magnetic data at the time, analyzed it, and then stored the files, magnetic tape files, in his garage. And then in 2006, someone asked him to run those files again through a modern-day supercomputer, and they found there was a massive diamagnetic bubble produced by Starfish Prime that expelled the magnetic field for up to 16 seconds. So I don't know if you've heard of the unified theory where gravity and electromagnetism are inversely proportional. If that's the case and the magnetic field was expelled for that period of time, it would mean that the gravity field was highly magnified. And I've been looking at this for 4 or 5 months, and I missed the obvious thing that someone pointed out. One of the Reddit users said that thing fell at a speed of nearly 900,000 miles an hour, which is way more than the 9.8 per second acceleration due to gravity. So, and this was all captured by 2 separate aircraft, filmed in high-speed film.
And for the frame of reference, those watching, I'll just show on screen. Maybe you can talk briefly to what was. So this footage was taken by EG&G, and it's the only footage remaining that remains sanitized. So I don't know if you wanted to use that as reference.
Yeah, that top row there is from the aircraft designated. It was a KC-135. It was heavily instrumented, crewed by EG&G. It was flying at 30,000 feet, and that nuclear blast was at 48 kilometers high. And you could see that top row has got a large white triangle covering the area where this object appears to fall from. And the bottom row is actually from another aircraft called Kettle 1. And you can see that thing dropping out from within the fireball. And so I believe that they were analysed. The top one was analysed by a different lab, and the bottom one was Los Alamos and Lawrence Livermore labs. I'm not sure which did which, but because if you've seen the Oppenheimer movie, you'd know that those 2 labs do not get on at all, and that is well documented. I think they had different levels of classification ideas, and that's why one got released in its entirety, and this is in 1998 when they came up for review, and the second one had that triangle device placed there. None of the other high altitude shots. There was Checkmate, Kingfish, and Tightrope. Starfish Prime was too far out because it's actually looking at the X-ray interaction with the atmosphere. Starfish Prime was outside the atmosphere, so what you're seeing here is the interaction of the X-rays with the atmosphere. It makes that glow. None of the other weapons shots are sanitized at all. They were all declassified in 1998. It's only that single one that has a close-up interior view of the phenomenology of what's going on in that nuclear blast that has been covered up. And you can see on this one here, this is the fireball expanding. The cameraman actually moves the camera to see what that thing was that fell. And mind you, 15 seconds in this frame is actually 1 second of normal time. So his reaction time is about 3 seconds. And I'm pretty sure they would have lost money because they were contracted to film that fireball, and he moves the camera because he's saying, what the hell was that?
And can you think of, before we kind of move on to another topic, can you think of any plausible explanation why that footage remains sanitized to this day?
Well, perhaps that object that gets knocked out was in the process of interfering, like with Robert Jacobson's, what he saw on the Vandenberg shot.
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps it detonated before it could do whatever, and it just got whacked out. And that's exactly what Tom DeLong says. He got the name wrong. He called it Starfish Prime, but the date he said was the 25th of October, 1962, which is the middle of the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Soviets had detonated one called K3 on the 22nd of October, and that caused the largest EMP effect ever known. Took out massive communications all throughout Kazakhstan.
Yeah, right.
So what DeLong was saying, that they were working together, it's plausible. Maybe the Cuban Missile Crisis was a cover in case they decided to shoot back. I'm not sure. But, you know, you take these things with a grain of salt at first when you hear them, but then later data comes out that sort of makes it plausible.
You go down other rabbit holes. Interesting. Now, so I just wanted to cover all of those different clips there, because I mean, and I applaud Jeff. He's done an enormous amount of research and effort to investigate the Bluegill Triple Prime case. Now, I honestly don't know what to make of it all. I mean, it is interesting that that is the only clip that has that kind of triangular shape on it. So if it was indeed sanitized, why was it sanitized? But there is a counter argument that's been put out in just the last couple of days. And so that's a good segue into jumping into, Douglas Dean Johnson, who I have the greatest of respect for. He does wonderful work reporting on UAP-related legislation, what's happening at the congressional level. He breaks it down so it's easy for folks to understand. So he has just published in the last couple of days his research, his investigation of several months, 4+ months, into the claims that have been made by Harold Malmgrom. Now, I haven't had an opportunity to read the report, the investigation, the article that Douglas Dean Johnson has put out in its entirety. It's very, very comprehensive, and it's very well sourced and researched. So it is a pretty striking rebuttal to everything that Harold Malmgrom has talked about in his interview with Jesse Michaels. It basically pokes holes in how Harold Malmgrom's claims, his claims of his work in an official capacity in government at a Q clearance level, and so on. Now, again, I have no judgment at the moment because I haven't yet read the report. I can only show you what has been said by Harold, by Jeff, and by Ross, obviously regarding the Bluegill Triple Prime incident that Jeff has researched extensively and Harold has talked about as well. But I would encourage you, it's always, we don't want to live in an echo chamber. So I would encourage you to have a look at the report that Douglas Dean Johnson has put out. The link is in the description below, and he really, makes a concerted effort to call into question some of the claims that Harold has made in that interview, and also regarding in a separate article about Bluegill Triple Prime. Now, I'm not going to read through this article because it is incredibly long. It's very, very extensive, and it's very well sourced. It's very well referenced. So I would encourage you to have a look at it if you're interested. I know I'm certainly going to be having a look at it as well. What Douglas Dean Johnson put out just this morning for us in Australia, or overnight for my friends across the pond, is an article that he has done. He's done a deep dive on the Bluegill Triple Prime incident. And so he has gone into great detail to basically offer a rebuttal to what Jeff has claimed in his research and what Harold has supported of the claims that Jeff has, or the conclusions that Jeff has come to at this point. Now, I'll just jump to, again, this is an extensive article, so I won't read through the whole thing, but I'll just read what's in reference to the research that Jeff has done. So this is from Douglas Dean Johnson. The association of the Bluegill Triple Prime nuclear test with a UFO event does not have a very long pedigree. In March 2025, Robert Hastings, whom I mentioned above, told me he'd never heard of a UFO event associated with Bluegill Triple Prime until he heard the theory in 2024 attributed to Jeff Crookshank, an Australian researcher. Crookshank constructed the theory after encountering 2016 remarks by Tom DeLonge, as discussed below, but DeLonge's statements were both internally contradictory and entirely lacking in evidence or sourcing. Crookshank based his theory mainly not on the words of DeLonge, which were the tip in my detective analogy, but other forms of evidence discussed in detail in this article. This is basically what Douglas Dean Johnson's conclusion is, his counter argument. Two movies that were made during the Bluegill Triple Prime test and made public a quarter century ago show an apparently smoking object tumbling away from the vicinity of the nuclear fireball, as discussed below. I concluded that object is very likely the 65-foot Thor rocket booster that carried the warhead aloft. I found still images published in classified reports of the 1960s, later declassified, that showed the booster near the fireball, illuminated by the nighttime detonation, with captions that explicitly identified it as the booster. In a third movie, a triangle occupying part of the image, and that's what we've seen thus far, image frames was interpreted by some as a sanitization device added in the laboratory. But this is surely wrong. The triangle is actually and obviously part of the image that appeared on the original emulsion film. It is an object within the camera that took the film, according to 3 nuclear image experts to whom I showed the footage. This article explores why it may appear as it does in the footage that we see. And then basically goes on and talks about, the origins of the Bluegill Triple Prime UFO knockdown theory. He obviously, references Jeff's work in quite comprehensively. So it's really a counter argument to what Jeff has put forward to date with his research and his hypothesis with the Bluegill Triple Prime incident. I do want to talk, we'll come down to, there was one other thing I just wanted to mention. I think it was here. Where is it? The falling object. So again, Douglas Dean Johnson is of the opinion that the falling object that you saw in that footage was the Thor booster. In the Bluegill Triple Prime test, the nuclear device was carried aloft by a Thor rocket that was launched from Johnston Island. It arced up to an apogee of about 660 miles, 900 kilometers. Before reaching apogee, the main engine shut off, and after completion of adjustments by small vernier rockets, 3 large instrument-packed pods, each 6.7 feet long, were released. The Thor rocket coasted up to an apogee, then headed downward and released the re-entry vehicle, which contained the warhead. Meanwhile, the pods on their own ballistic arcs had each originated themselves vertically and were arrayed between 3,281 and 6,890 feet from the detonation point, quite close to their ideal planned position, a very impressive feat of precision, I think. After the detonation, the pods continued to descend, their falls broken by a parachute system to be recovered by waiting warships. The Thor was a single-stage rocket that the spent Thor booster was 65 feet long and 8 feet wide. So again, you can read through this entire article. It is a very well-researched and very well-sourced counter-argument. I'm not offering an opinion on it just yet because I'm going to have to go back and have a read of it. I only skimmed it very briefly prior to today's show. But I can provide you with a response that Jeff offered before I went on with you today. So let me read for you now. This is, let me just pull up my phone so I can read you. This is from, this image was shared by Jeff and he was happy for me to share it. So basically Jeff has said, where is it? Here. So Jeff basically is saying that, you know, Douglas Dean Johnson knows that frame 2499 of film 95125 is the one that has been redacted. So this is Bluegill Triple Prime debris and fireball with external outgoing and internal ingoing shock fronts at 1 second taken from the aircraft. Now there is one image that this is again film 95125 frame 2499. Now this is the one that Jeff is contending that Douglas Dean Johnson knows that the frame has actually been redacted, and Jeff actually added some commentary for me to because I asked him, you know, what are your initial thoughts on this rebuttal from Douglas Dean Johnson? So Jeff's comments to me this morning was he says the Avco Mark IV re-entry vehicle had a very low drag coefficient, so it could punch through the atmosphere quickly and not present a target for Soviet AICBMs. A large high-drag Thor missile burning up on re-entry would be a long way behind the re-entry vehicle, and those scientists made sure it was far away from the detonation. It's quite ludicrous for Doug to assert they both descended from 700 kilometers and ended up a few thousand feet from each other. He's made a bit of a blunder here. So, and there are some in a Reddit post that have, come to the conclusion that it was bokeh. This is a bokeh effect, which it clearly is not. Jeff is going to write up a formal response to Douglas Dean Johnson's rebuttal or counter argument. But it's interesting nonetheless. And I have to say hats off to both gents for doing their due diligence and putting forth a hypothesis that's well sourced, that's well researched, that's cited. It all helps to get to the heart of the truth. And this is how obviously things should be debated. Now, obviously, there is a little bit of a confirmation bias that that kind of flows through on Douglas Dean Johnson's article when you read it. But if you put that aside, you know, and you look at what he has been able to put together in terms of documentation, his sources, how it's sourced, it will be very interesting to see how this pans out over time, because I think it certainly is a mystery. You know, the big question, if this is a sanitization mark, then why was it sanitized? If it's not a sanitization mark, if it's not a redaction and it's a camera artifact, then that adds weight to Douglas Dean Johnson's hypothesis that it is a Thor booster rocket stage. It's all very interesting, and I'm sure we'll learn a lot more about it in the coming weeks. I wanted to share that with you because I've had Jeff on the show, and Jeff has shared with me information on his research on Bluegill Triple Prime, and I've covered it on X as well. I don't know either way. Very, very interesting to see how it all pans out. But again, kudos to both folks for doing their due diligence, putting forward a hypothesis, and trying to back it up with research sources and documentation. We're getting to the back end here, folks. So I just want to talk you through briefly. It was very interesting not long ago to see that there is an effort in Japan to formally implement or establish an office comparable to ARO. And if this goes ahead, the Five Eyes are really going to be left behind, because the US, and following slowly behind Canada, are taking the topic of UAP seriously, but Australia, the UK, and New Zealand really are not. So it's interesting to see that a proposal has been put forward by cross-party group requests Ministry of Defence to establish specialised organisation for collecting and analysing UFO and other intelligence. Amid concerns that the existence of UFOs poses a security issue, a bipartisan group of lawmakers on the 16th called on the Ministry of Defence to establish a specialised organisation to collect and analyse information. The bipartisan group was established last year amid concerns that the existence of UFOs and other such objects would pose a security issue, with Prime Minister Ishiba serving as its chief advisor. On the 16th, the group's chairman, former Defence Minister Hamada, and others met with the Defence Minister Nakatani at the Ministry of Defence, and in light of the increasing number of cases of unidentified flying objects, including drones, they requested the establishment of a specialised organisation to collect and analyse information, saying that it's necessary to prepare for UFOs. Minister Nakatani responded, "We're conducting information gathering and vigilance with a sense of urgency, including of unidentifiable objects. If any new information becomes known that needs to be announced, we will continue to make efforts to make it public as soon as possible." Afterwards, Hamada told reporters, "It's extremely important to prepare so that the unforeseen does not happen, and I would like the Ministry of Defence to respond appropriately." So again, very interesting to see Japan is taking taking a serious tone with the topic from a national security perspective. And if they do, Japan and Australia have quite the alliance, quite a close alliance. It's going to put further pressure on the other Five Eyes countries to get off its ass and maybe provide a formal position on, well, maybe we should review our positions on UAP, that move along, folks, there's nothing to see here, and maybe have a look a little bit further and more seriously into what the US, Canada are proposing to do and Japan are proposing to do. So I would say watch this space. Very interesting on that front. Also has made a comeback into the scene is Carl Nell. So Carl Nell recently authored for the Sol Foundation a new white paper called The UFO Enigma, a call for US government disclosure. Now, I have added the link to this in the show notes below, so you can have a look at it at your leisure. But I just wanted to call attention to, if I can find where it is, some references in this document, because what is interesting, it's 25 pages. It's pretty comprehensive. There are some references to Australia. And so in the executive summary, Carl Nell writes, "The UAP Disclosure Act would create an independent review board of 9 distinguished citizens at the uppermost tiers of their profession to serve as that control group. Nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate, the board would have the responsibility of centralizing and assessing all extant government information concerning UFOs, with the intent of creating public transparency, assessing the defense and national security issues raised by the objects, and setting the agenda for international cooperation." So Carl Nell is putting forward again the idea that this Disclosure Act with a review board will obviously help maximize transparency, move the needle forward on better understanding the extent and nature of UAP and the national security risk that they potentially pose. Beyond executing this plan, the review board would also be ideally suited to recommend national policy addressing whole of government issues raised by the reality of UFOs and the need for federally funded scientific research on the subject and proposals for meeting this global challenge through diplomatic and/or economic cooperation with allies. So calling for greater engagement with allies of the United States. Now, we'll fast forward to some other pages in the document. Prior disclosures of the truth failed to gain traction. Now, this is where Australia plays a hefty part in what Carl Nell has put forward. A declassified 1971 Australian intelligence assessment, now available through Australia's online National Archive, corroborates the earlier Twining memorandum, the Twining memo, and lends increased credence to the first-hand accounts by stating that analyses of UFO reports by US Air Force intelligence in the 50s and 60s indicated that real phenomena were being reported which had flight characteristics so far in advance of the US aircraft that only an extraterrestrial origin could be envisaged. The Australian assessment also discloses that the US government intentionally denied that UFOs are real while pursuing research into their apparent capacity to overcome gravity. And this is from Harry Turner's 1971 minute paper for the JIO, the Joint Intelligence Organization. A government agency studied the UFO reports with the intention of determining the UFO propulsion methods and persuaded the US to use Project Blue Book as a means of publicly debunking UFOs and at a later stage to allocate funds for the launch of a crash program into anti-gravity power. Such an intensive onslaught, this is paraphrasing obviously from the report, such an intensive onslaught of the gravity enigma can only be rationalized within the context of firm belief that UFOs were real and the intelligence behind them knew how to control gravity. So, yeah, again, Harry Turner's 1971 report is playing a part in Carl Nell's white paper that is really advocating for the UAP Disclosure Act. He goes on later in the white paper, says the Rua Zimbabwe daytime landing at the Ariel School in 1984 and the uncannily similar 1966 Westall High School daytime encounter in Melbourne, Australia are especially demonstrative. Ariel School students, now grown into adulthood, have recently been re-interviewed and continue to attest to the accuracy of their original testimony, as do the living Westall observers, which is true. We face a global challenge warranting international engagement through both diplomatic and Five Eyes intelligence channels, as most recently evidenced by repeated drone incursions over sensitive sites both domestically and internationally. And I think that was everything that was referencing Five Eyes, Australia, and so on. So interesting document. I believe that Carl Nell is certainly an advocate for greater transparency via this UAP Disclosure Act, which has been basically shut down the last two times it's been proposed. So is it going to come up again in 2025? Who knows? Have a look at that white paper if you haven't already seen it. We're going to get close to wrapping things up. I do want to just show you this one clip from the recent episode of Weaponized. There's part 3 of Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp's interview with Immaculate Constellation whistleblower Matthew Brown. So let me play this clip for you because it leads nicely into the Five Eyes.
Need to understand what they're seeing to understand the impact if they're curious enough. Question, like any country in this world could disclose at this point, a major country with technological development could disclose we are not alone in the universe. There are others as visitors have been here a long time. Why? Why has everybody agreed to not say that to the public? Do you have any philosophies why?
I think in the West, this is the reaction, and that's an important distinction. I cannot comment so much on why Russia or China have not addressed this in a different way than us. But I think in the West, in the Five Eyes Alliance and its subsidiaries, there is a understanding, at least, that this is not talked about at official channels, especially if you're a small kid on the block. You You don't speak out of turn. But it also points to, I think, the fact that this doesn't ultimately reside in the government anymore. This is held in an illegal internationalist regime, some sort of international cabal of sorts, mix of corporate, military, political, intelligence, and criminal interests that have come together, and they have subverted us and have taken this and have made it the source of their wealth and power.
So what is an interesting takeaway from me there is Matthew Brown says that, the Five Eyes don't speak out of turn. If you're a small kid on the block like Australia, you don't talk about the UAP UF issue. And I believe that to be true. I believe that the public position of the Australian Department of Defence is that, move along, folks, there's nothing to see here. But behind closed doors, there are some very, very serious discussions being had on the UAP issue, and even engagement with the United States. Watch this space is what I will say. Watch this space. So let us now move away from that clip, and I want to talk briefly about what is ahead. Now, I'm only speeding along here because my wife is going to storm in a moment because she needs to get the car out of the garage. So I just want to wrap a few things up. There are some interesting events that are coming up later this year. And one of them is, if I just pull this up for you, where is it? So Close Encounters Australia, who previously have organized a Q&A session with Ross Coulthart in both Melbourne and in Sydney. Later this year, they will be doing there will be a talk on the 12th of July at the Melbourne Theosophical Society in Melbourne, historic crash sites, with Dr. Roger Stankovic, who is the director of MUFON for the Australia and New Zealand chapter. So UAP researcher Roger Stankovic will be presenting the history and on-location footage involving multiple legendary crash sites in the USA during an expedition he undertook with Close Encounters Australia that included Roswell, Aztec, Kingman, Aurora crash sites, and the Socorro landing site. So if you're interested if you're a Melbourneite, I'm going to certainly try and get along to that event. I'm always interested to hear what Roger has to say. So the link is in the description below. If you want to have a look at that, feel free to check it out at your leisure. Let's just kind of get to the back end. I do want to cover off on a key FOIA update for you. So recently, we look at, let's just pull up documents here for you. I want to show you, I put in a request with, so I put in a request, a FOIA request. My request was on 24th May 2023, the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, ARO, held its inaugural Five Eyes UAP Caucus Working Group meeting. On consideration above, please be advised that I kindly request a copy of the agenda, presentations, and minutes for all in-person and virtual Five Eyes UAP Caucus Working Group meetings held in 2024 by ARO, because there was the Canadian equivalent of FOIA that was released that I talked about in our last episode that showed that ARO planned to have annual in-person engagement and virtual engagement with its Five Eyes partners. So I wanted to know, all right, well, if they're meeting on an annual cadence, well, what is the what basically have they talked about? And this was the response that I got earlier this month. The All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, a component of the OSD, Office of Secretary of Defense, conducted a search of their record systems based on the information provided in your request. After thorough searches of electronic records and files of ARO, no records of the kind you described could be identified. So this is consistent with a response that I received to an email from Sue Goff, Pentagon spokesperson on all things UAP. And let me see if I've got the right one on screen. I do. So this is an email that I sent to Sue on the 1st of May, basically asking, the following question. Did ARO host an in-person Five Eyes UAP caucus working group meeting in 2024? And did ARO host one or more virtual sessions? And the response that I eventually got back the following day was ARO did not host a Five Eyes UAP caucus working group meeting in 2024. So no engagement. I take from that response, no engagement in 2024. Now, I followed up with another question for Sue. And, following that response from Sue, I sent a follow-up email same day. Hi, Sue. Many thanks for your prompt reply confirmation. Much appreciated. Very quick follow-up, if I may. Has ARO had any engagement, whether in person, virtual, or via correspondence, with all Five Eyes partners since the inaugural Five Eyes UAP caucus working group meeting held in 2023? And I had to, press her on time and time again thereafter that email to try and get a response because she didn't want to respond straight away. Again, that was my email. Has ARO had any engagement? I sent a follow-up email circling back to see if you're able to comment. I won't have a response for you until Monday. I'm following up. The response that I get on the 10th. Hi, Grant. We aren't going to comment on specifics of the UAPTF. Huh? I didn't ask about the UAPTF. I asked about ARO. Is she referring to the UAPTF as ARO there? I can tell you there was a small core of primary personnel and that the UAPTF reached across DoD and other USG agencies for specific expertise as needed. Now, I asked for clarification in response to that. I asked about ARO, not the UAPTF. She hasn't responded. So if I'm to take the UAPTF there as her referring to ARO, it doesn't sound like there's been any further engagement since 2023 with the Five Eyes, which kind of conflicts with Dr. John Kozlowski's comments last year that he was planning to have greater engagement with the Five Eyes in 2025. Now, that kind of remains to be seen. So just put a pin in that. Nothing's really happened on the Five Eyes front since really 2023, which is a little disappointing. Last couple of things I want to leave you with, folks. Some exciting announcements. I will be speaking at this year's Australian UFO Festival, formerly known as the Cardwell UFO Festival in Cardwell in Queensland. It's taking place on the 8th, 9th, and 10th. So any Queenslanders that are watching the show, feel free to come along. Look forward to meeting you there. I was thrilled and honored to be invited to speak. So this will be my first time ever attending a UFO conference. This is really the only conference in Australia on the UAP UFO topic. It's been rebranded to the Australian UFO Festival, and it's actually looking like it's going to be the biggest lineup of speakers yet. To give you a sense as to who some of the speakers are that I'm able to confirm, Ross Coulthart will be speaking. Now, he may be an online engagement. It's not confirmed if it'll be in person or online. I suspect might be online. Lee Phillips, researcher and filmmaker. Andrew Radzovitz, Karen Swain, Roger Stankovic, Rowan Bowe, Anthony Goodall, Peter Curry, Damien Knott, Cheryl Gottschall, and hopefully Bill Chalker. So it looks like it's going to be a massive lineup of some really interesting speakers. Again, I'm honored to have been invited to speak. Oliver's will be speaking on what the hell is Australia doing about UAPs and covering off on my research to date. So feel free to come along if you are a Queenslander. Even if you're not a Queenslander, you're in any other part of the country. If you're interested to get along to what is bound to be a fun UFO festival over a couple of days, feel free. Mammoth show, folks. 3 hours and 10 minutes. My wife is probably going to murder me when I get out of the office, but I do really appreciate all of the comments that you put forth, folks. I know there've been a ton. I just want to go through a few of them because I am appreciative of you taking the time. That was good. 120 each K. Yeah, Pine Gap. It's no easy drive from Alice Springs. Let's have a look. Jimmy, I'll take remote viewing at face value when they use it to find missing planes and stuff like that. I think remote viewing was set up as a means of psychological warfare with Russia. It's certainly been presented as a plausible idea. Hal was very heavily involved in Scientology at the time. Apparently, a lot of these remote viewers were tied to Scientology as well. That is true. John, I know a ton of people are very impressed by remote viewing and believe wrongly that it has been proven to work. Yes, the government studied it and they stopped studying it because it didn't actually work. I'm willing to host a test with a remote viewer using the scientific method. I have a test in mind, but I'm willing to work with the viewer to accommodate their sensibilities on condition that it truly is randomized and repeated enough to rule out chance. I promise they'll fall flat. If you haven't already done so, John, I'd encourage you to reach out to Astral on X. He does a lot of remote viewing attempts or remote viewing sessions in Spaces on X. So if you haven't already done so, that might be a good connection for you to make there. Let's have a look. UFO Busters, that UFO Show Australia. G'day, thanks for joining. Good to see you in the chat. Excuse the car noise in the background. My wife is about to jump out. Wi-Fi isn't always accurate, specifically in their UFO focused podcast. Very true, but it is entertaining. I do find it a bit of a relief to all of the drama that plays out in UFO X and UFO Twitter, which I'm guilty of as well. So I need to do a better job there. Bex Greer has a new doco called Asymmetric Disclosure coming out. I wonder how much of this new doco he'll be bashing Lou, Mellon, and Grush. Geez, he's churning them out. He's putting a hell of a lot of docos out in a short period of time. Question, Grant, have you seen any of my UAP recordings from Leichhardt's in Australia? Just wondering. I don't believe I have. If you want to reach out to me on X, feel free, or put a comment in the chat below, and I'll be sure to have a look at it if you'd like me to. Let's have a look at other comments that have popped through. Great to see you guys really engaging in the chat. You certainly are having some really interesting and respectful discussions back and forth in the chat. Jimmy's comments to Beck, don't get me wrong, I think Australia is involved with this, but I think they're doing behind the scenes metamaterial stuff like that. They're certainly doing stuff behind the scenes, I can tell you that. Rolf, thank you for your comments, my friend. Thank you for joining from X. Bex will be there, and I think that might be referencing the Roger Stankovic July event, where he'll be talking about crash retrievals and crash sites. Might even see you in Queensland, Bex. I don't know, but it is indeed a mega show, Technics. So thank you all for taking time out of your day. I am absolutely spent, and that is pretty much everything that I've wanted to cover off on with you today, folks. So I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to get some breakfast. It's way after lunch already. As always, thank you for taking time out of your morning, your day, your evening, your graveyard shift. Really appreciate you staying with me for 3 hours and 15 minutes. Give it a like, share, subscribe if you've enjoyed this show. If you're not already subscribed, please feel free. A lot of you aren't. As always, look forward to seeing you again on another episode of the Unexplained Rundown. So enjoy the rest of your day, enjoy your week, and see you again soon.
If you have enjoyed this episode of the Unexplained Rundown, please consider giving it a thumbs up, sharing with your friends, family, colleagues, and social network, as well as subscribing to the channel. And if you'd like to be notified whenever the Unexplained Rundown goes live, premieres, or posts a new video, be sure to ring that cowbell.